Chilling tales for dark nights.
Want to make sure you never miss a Chilling Tales for Dark Nights video again? Be sure to subscribe and hit that bell to turn on notifications.
1. Fritz swept dust into a plastic dustpan and threw it into a waiting trash can. But even old and at a distance, Peepaw saw the line of dirt left over. Fritz was agitated, and it made the boy sweep absolutely for shit. Not that the shop had to look all that neat. People didn't come for the cement floors or the whitewashed walls, but for his famed pickles. They drove hundreds, sometimes thousands of miles and handed over wads of cash for jars of the stuff.
Fritz! Go ahead and sweep that again, he said from his leaning spot in the corner.
Peepaw himself resembled the pickles he sold. He was a short man of few dimensions and had a distinct bump on the side of his nose.
And thinking on it, after, go straighten out those jars over there. Line up those labels uniform-like I tell you.
Fritz threw his head back, his shoulders dropping as though the broom and dustpan suddenly weighed a tremendous amount. He gave a pained look to the clock on the wall.
Not the clock,
the elder said, pointing.
The spot where you just were.
Peepaw,
Fritz complained.
It's 2 minutes to 5. Let's just lock up.
I wasn't aware I was keeping you from something,
Peepaw said.
Got somewhere to be?
Well...
Hey, remember, I'm the one doing your mom the favor, he told Fritz. She doesn't want you snorting this or smoking that. It's not like I need someone to sweep the floors like crap. I did that fine before.
It's just... I told Alexandra I'd meet her after work,
Fritz confessed.
She's gonna wait for me on the bench outside the candy shop. I promised I'd bring a jar of spicy garlic.
Stay away from that girl,
the elder snapped.
Careful. It's the pickles she wants, and not the one you're trying to give.
Fritz's face dropped.
Not everyone's after our pickles.
My pickles! And yes, they are.
No, Peepaw, they're...
a 200-year-old recipe. And you don't think everyone's after these pickles. It's all they talk to me about.
Fritz groaned.
That's because you never leave the store.
The elder grinned.
You got me there. We close when we close. So get sweeping!
2. Councilman Taylor had no idea how many cigarettes or bottle of cola he had had. He had hardly moved from his bench for hours. He watched the pickle shop with a quiet disdain. "We Sell Pickles" was written on the lone sign in the window, and to Taylor's annoyance, the county record showed the shop was registered as simply Pickles. During his stakeout, he counted over 100 people going in with money and coming out with armfuls of pickle jars. Thinking of all that money really bothered the councilman. Taylor, as head of Dodge Chamber of Commerce, looked at their little downtown as a point of pride. Dodge itself was an agriculture town dominated by a big slaughterhouse, so the old-time architecture and painted block of storefronts on Main was a bit of refinement. Except for the eyesore, We Sell Pickles. Unlike the other shops, We Sell Pickles bore no decorations, even during Christmas or Easter, when all of downtown gussied themselves up with bunting and ribbons and window paint. Even worse, the store sat near one of the first corners of downtown, so that the diminutive and creatively compliant Cheryl's Honey House was dwarfed by the big windows and uniform rows of pickles, onions, okra, jalapenos, and anything that could be pickled, all beneath a paper sign declaring "We Sell Pickles" in thick black letters. Sure, We Sell Pickles may have only turned away a handful of people a week, but Dodd could use every penny after the bad press because of those silly murders. On the sly, offers were made to replace We Sell Pickles. Everything from cafes, antique shops, a locally sourced wine room, and 2 leather companies offered to have Peepaw Pickles' legs broken to move a deal along. Yet dislodging We Sell Pickles, Taylor found, was nearly impossible. Not only did the old pickle man pay his rent on time in full, he did so months in advance. Of all the shop owners, he alone never complained about the county appraisal that raised their rent. And even worse, people loved those pickles. Everyone Taylor saw go into the shop came out carrying jars and smiling. They came from all over, too. Taylor took special notice of the out-of-state plates, and the further the state, the more they'd park on the street, walk right past the other shops and their nice displays to go right into We Sell Pickles. These out-of-towners usually left with a lot of sloshing pickle jars and expressions that reminded Taylor of an uncle of his who used to huff antifreeze. Some pickle eaters even drove off with a pickle sticking out from between their teeth like cigars. Smoking, Taylor went over his plan. Past closing, he'd break into We Sell Pickles. Surely there'd be something he could find, a violation or evidence of a crime, to finally be rid of the pickle store. Often he had seen Peepaw Pickles spit his chew on the street, and Taylor was certain he probably did so around the pickles. It was good for Taylor that Peepaw Pickles was as rigid with his schedule as he was with his lack of community participation. 3. Councilman Taylor wasn't sure how so much grass could grow between buildings when the alleys hardly got any light. But as the sun set, he found himself in thigh-high grass behind a strip of downtown stores. He was sure there was nothing in the grass but some mosquitoes and ticks that fed on rats. Taylor waited until the last few minutes of light before prying open the We Sell Pickles service door with a small crowbar. The door made a loud, painful sound. Taylor waited a few moments to see if anyone heard, before slipping into the building. He entered the service space meant for electricians and plumbers to do their routine checks away from any customers or tourists. Those spaces doubled as emergency exits for shopkeepers who might be in the back of their shops during a fire or some other emergency. Taylor knew enough to disconnect a fire door so he wouldn't set off the alarm. If it went off, the county fire department would swarm en masse because the fire department often had very little to do around Dodd. The back room was long, wide, with barrels of cucumbers and okra and peppers lined up against the walls. A big work table in the middle was stained from the splashes of pickle juice and vegetable debris. The vinegar smell made Taylor dizzy. After he got his camera ready, he ran his finger across the surface of the table. A dirty finger and a clean line across the grime would be great, Taylor thought. Yet there was nothing there. Not so much as a smudge of residue. The table, he was shocked to find, wasn't even sticky. The jars, Taylor prayed, had to be dirty, but like the table, they gleamed pristine in the camera flash. Not a single one even photographed cloudy. Next were the barrels, but for those, Taylor planned to snot into them and scratch his head until the surface got a light dusting of gray and hair. Yet he hadn't anticipated the smell. He had almost gotten used to the vinegar smell seeping from the hundreds of pickle jars, but opening a barrel, Taylor made the mistake of inhaling deeply. The garlic and vinegar and capers singed the inside of his nose, clinging to the sensitive flesh. He coughed until his eyes watered, crashing through the place. The only thing to bring him out of it was a doorknob jamming him painfully in the hip. He hissed, ingested more sharp pickled air, and used his tie to cover his nose and mouth. Catching his breath, Taylor saw a door nearly hidden in the dim depths of the room. It bore a paper sign that read, "No entry, especially you, Fritz." Taylor's imagination ran with all the possibilities of what lay behind the door. A hidden trash pile, a stash of at-home bug spray stored in a non-government approved way, maybe a whole stack of crates filled with rotten cucumbers that Peepaw Pickles sold to save money. Whatever was behind the door, there were possibilities, while in the current room there was just pristine frustration. The door was locked, but the door frame was so warped that the latch was exposed. Taylor used his councilman's ID to open it. There was no trash, no fetid crates. Instead, there was a narrow staircase going down into darkness. Taylor was stunned. There were no basements on that block, least of all any that looked to stretch below the neighboring stores. Phone lighting the way, Taylor descended the steps. The old planks dipped beneath his weight. The stairs ended almost 15 feet below the street level and emptied into a hall of brick, its floor plain cement. To his right, the hall dead-ended at a set of heavy wooden shelves laden with cloudy pickle jars. To his left, the hall stretched another 15 feet or so, ending with a wooden door. Iron bands kept the planks together. The door looked almost as old as the town. Light glinted between the slats of the door. The door was unlocked. 4. The door revealed a gigantic glass vat of pickle juice braced with iron reinforcements of an ancient make. Vegetable scraps and spices swirled slow in the sickly yellow-green solution. The walls surrounding the vat were covered in framed pictures and articles about We Sell Pickles. Among them as well was an outdated pinup calendar. Taylor looked at the vat and imagined Peepaw Pickle filling it with pre-measured ingredients so it might taste good enough to blight downtown Dodge for another decade. Taylor smiled, thinking if the pickle man went to such effort to conceal the vat, it must be his most precious secret. Yes, there were plenty of vendors who'd love to know Peepaw Pickle's recipes. Taylor imagined that with some well-groomed competition, We Sell Pickles might be outclassed into closing. Taylor looked around for something to collect the pickle juice, but there was nothing but a filthy bucket, and if anyone was to mimic the pickle brine, the sample had to be clean. Out in the hall, he found a dusty jar. The pop of its unsealing was like a gunshot. Shaking his furrowed nose at the closed stink in the jar, Taylor blew into it, sending a nimbus of dust into his own face. Back at the vat, he looked for some kind of spigot or valve on it, but couldn't find one. Exhausting all options on the ground, Taylor looked up at the vat's heavy lid. Sighing, he reminded himself that a little trouble now would grant Dodd a future without We Sell Pickles, and when Taylor, an old man, would look at Dodd's beautiful, quaint downtown on some distant holiday, there'd be solid blocks of festive decorations and shopkeepers that understood the value of a cohesive community. Dreaming of some distant Christmas, Taylor went and found a stepladder to get him up to the lid. Once there, Taylor found the lid and its wheel latch were in good working order, oiled and dusted. Taylor couldn't think of a place to put the jar, so he stuck it between his thighs and tried opening the lid. The wheel groaned with each turn, and finally, the lid shook from release. The lid was heavy, and when Taylor pushed it open, the stepladder clattered on its legs. The lid swung up on its hinges, landed with a resounding crash that nearly knocked Taylor off the stepladder. Balance regained, he checked the glass sides for cracks. Seeing no leaks, Taylor steadied himself. One jar and they're gone, he thought, dipping the jar Achilles-like into the pickle juice. It filled a little, but seeing shreds of vegetable matter, Taylor leaned further, scooping them into the jar. It was best to get as many ingredients as possible. Taylor swirled the juice around in hopes of corralling more of the brown stuff. There was what looked like the bulb of a small dark-rooted onion, and Taylor went after it like it was a prize. He had to get on his tiptoes, but he got it. "Success!" he whispered, bringing the jar up so he could look at his find. It swirled and tumbled and somersaulted to reveal itself with such a startling clarity that Taylor forgot to breathe. Turning gracefully in the jar was a human eye. Slightly shriveled, the whites dyed the sickly green-yellow of pickle brine, and the roots deflated into black threads. Taylor dropped the jar into the vat, not thinking of retrieving it. He had to get to the sheriff. He had thought to catch Weasel Pickles violating health codes, not hiding body parts. But as he descended the rickety stepladder, something like a shadow within the depths of the vat caught his eye. The shape rising and breaking the brine surface caused a vinegar eruption. It lay across the lip on its side like a newly beached whale. The pickled thing had once been a man, an old one. His body had shrunk and wrinkled like a drowned thumb. The hands were curled up near its bearded chin. Within one eye was a thick garlic clove, brined the same yellow as the pickled thing's horrid teeth. Taylor took a moment to get the courage to examine the body, yet when he reached to touch it, the slick skin repulsed him, and he took a step down instead. He needed to be away and far from Weasel Pickles, he thought. But the pickled thing wanted different. It snatched at Taylor's arm and tried to pull itself out. It exhaled in bursts, each word a sharp spell that splattered herbs and vegetable bits across Taylor's face. It cleared its throat by gurgles and coughs and slapped around until he felt Taylor. The pickled thing clutched Taylor's arms with an unreal strength. Its old mouth, gray-gummed and toothless, enveloped Taylor's hand. The leathery tongue wiggled all through Taylor's fingers. The pickled thing retched.
Terrible! Terrible! They're goddamn terrible!
It spat.
Those are the worst damn pickles I ever tasted! You dumb little shit! My pecker spitting out a no good, no nothing like you is God's cruel joke, I tell you!
Taylor shrieked and lost his footing. His hand, greased with spit, slid from the pickled thing's grasp. In his fall, Taylor caught the lip of the vat, but that only gave the pickled thing a chance to slap around and catch the councilman again.
They ain't got no spice,
it said, his wooden fingers digging into Taylor's forearm.
They ain't got no snap. They're all soft and pudgy like a fat lady's fingers.
The pickled thing couldn't hold Taylor, and he fell flat with a loud thump. One of the pickled thing's hands and most of its other arm were locked onto Taylor's sleeve and wouldn't let go. The bones popped from their sockets, and the soggy flesh tore like cheesecloth. Yet the pickled thing still clung onto the lip of the container, the juice churning from his wild kicking.
There ain't much left in this jar but me and the recipe, you lout. And I ain't ever writing it down. Not now. Not never.
It rambled, yammering vaguely about recipes and whore sons and his deal-spiced legacy.
They promised me sons for my pickles and gave me nothing but bums. Bums! I swear by this brine.
Taylor didn't stay to hear the rest. He limped, fast as his portly body allowed, through the cellar hall and to the foot of the steps, all the time looking behind him and fearing that the pickled thing had gotten out of his container and crawled on its belly after him. But the pickled thing was content howling in its vat. Sighing, Taylor took the first step up the stairs, but stopped. Peepaw Pickle and his grandson stood at the top of the stairs.
Well, Fritz,
the old man said,
looks like we've got ourselves a real dilly of a pickle, don't we?
Sure do, Peepaw. We sure do.
5.
And that's why you're going down there and cleaning his tank,
Peepaw said, loading a heavy box into the back of his truck. Glum-faced, Fritz crossed the sidewalk into the store and got another box from a tall stack. When he returned, he handed Peepaw the box, saying,
He doesn't like me, and he's weird.
Watch it, boy,
Peepaw snapped.
That's my great-great-grandpeepaw, and no shit he's weird. He's 200 years old, and being blind and pickled ain't doing his brains any favors. So you'll go down there and treat him with respect. He's fed us for generations.
I don't know why I have to.
Because it's your fault,
Peepaw said.
You're always out back smoking your stuff. And don't think I don't smell it on account of the pickles neither, because I do.
Fritz groaned, beginning an excuse, and a box slipped from his grasp. It hit the sidewalk and the glass inside clinked together. Both heard a muffled crunch. Peepaw sighed.
And you wonder why you annoy the man, He spends his day in a jar and gets to come out to a careless no-good.
Fritz crouched and prodded the box with his fist.
I think it's okay.
Peepaw was struck dumb.
You think? You what? Go ahead and pick it up then, Go on.
Fritz lifted the box, its contents crunched and clinked, and took it over to Peepaw. The old man cut the tape seal with a pocket knife. He opened it, showing the contents to Fritz, and said,
They look okay.
The late evening painted everything in shadow, but the contents were undeniable. A jar filled with garlic and dill and peppers broken. Pickles strewn all over, though not in enough abundance to hide the pieces of Taylor. A plump hand, an ear, an eye and tongue.
I swear,
Peepaw said.
Drop another, and I'll put you in the vat to keep him company. You!
Y'all ain't usually open this late,
A voice called.
Trouble with the help?
Peepaw and Fritz turned. Sheriff Lieben shut his cruiser door and walked up to them. Raising his hand to acknowledge the lawman, Peepaw chuckled and said,
I think I'm madder at myself for expecting more out of a lousy teenager.
Don't be too hard on 'em, the sheriff said, shaking Peepaw's hand. Then he saw the leaking box in Fritz's arms.
Oh, wasting good pickles, huh?
The sheriff shook his head.
That's a hanging offense in Dodge, son.
The sheriff smiled.
But for a box of pickles,
he pointed to a stack near the door.
I'm sure I can look the other way. Hey, you don't want them pickles,
Peepaw said.
The boy here put water in the brine instead of vinegar, and ruined enough product to have him as a slave labor until he's a man.
Peepaw snapped his fingers.
Get the sheriff 4 of the garlic and 4 of the missus likes okra, right?
The sheriff nodded.
4 of the okra. Mild?
You know she's got the ulcer.
Mild,
Peepaw concluded, waving Fritz away. Peepaw and the sheriff spoke about the heat while Fritz filled the box with jars of pickles and okra. The sheriff didn't take a step before opening the box and retrieving a jar. He selected a small pickle and ate it in 2 bites. In a satisfied daze, the sheriff got in his cruiser and left. He waved to them with another pickle in his hand. Peepaw and Fritz waved back until the sheriff was gone.
Hurry up with those boxes,
Peepaw told him.
Break another, and you'll be cleaning the tank with your toothbrush.
He's making a list and checking it twice. He's gonna find out who's naughty and nice. Santa Claus is coming to town. You know that list that Santa Claus makes? Well, guys, it's real. Read on and find out just how I know. I know that Christmas is meant to be a season of good cheer, but since what happened, it's one I fear. I dare say I was one of the lucky ones to get out. But I digress. Let me start from the beginning. My name is Joey McIntosh, and when this happened, I was only 7 years old. I am 17 now. When I was younger, I was a selfish, spoiled little turd, and it shames me to admit it, but it's true. I was so ungrateful, and no matter how much I got, I wanted more. I don't know how my poor parents coped. Throughout the year, I was like the child from hell. Disrespectful, spiteful, cruel, and totally thoughtless were just a few things on my list of qualities, so to speak. Yet, despite all this, my parents never failed to do their best for me, come Easter, birthday, and Christmas. However, I'd imagine there were worse behaved kids than myself. This particular Christmas, shit really kicked off. During my 7th year alive, I was such a little shit. Frankly, I don't know how my parents managed to put up with all I put them through. My parents, however, saw beyond my youthful hellish oafishness. They kept their patience and unbelievably cheery attitude despite my evil ways. They kept warning me Santa wouldn't be pleased, but would I listen? Would I hell? Santa doesn't exist, I retorted defiantly. Very well, Joey. Don't believe in him, and woe betide you on Christmas morning, replied my mom, looking disgruntled. I didn't let up, though. I continued right on, just being an asshole and getting on my mom and dad's nerves at any chance I had. Until Christmas Eve, that is. Christmas Eve came along, and I was as obnoxious as ever. I pushed my parents so far that I was sent to bed without any supper. That didn't faze me, though. I decided that I would stay awake and await the arrival of the so-called Santa. Just so happened, I wasn't the only one waiting. Now, unbeknownst to me, this particular year wasn't just a bad one for all the parents, as all of us dipshit kids would soon find out. So determined was I to prove that my mother and father were wrong and full of crap over their Santa claims that I faked being asleep and waited until I was sure everyone was in bed asleep. It was only then I made my move. Stealthily, I crept along the darkened landing, being sure to avoid the creaky floorboards. I tiptoed down the stairs toward the living room, hoping that my stupid parents held up tradition enough to leave the usual milk and cookies. Christ, I got sent to bed without food, so it was the least my sucky parents could do. I walked into the gloom-filled front room and flipped on the light switch, walking towards the fireplace and scoring. I saw a mouth-watering plate of tasty-looking cookies and a glass of milk, though I wasn't sure how long it had stood there. I flopped down in the armchair my dad loved to sit in. Screw him, I thought rebelliously. I started wolfing down the heaven on the plate and waited the inevitable. Either one of my parents in a crappy Santa suit or the supposed big fat git himself. Personally, I wanted to see the look on my mom or dad's face when I caught them out, thus proving them to be liars in my eyes. I made myself comfortable and waited. At around midnight, the grandfather clock in the hallway struck the hour and made me nearly crap my pants. Damn that clock. I was already on edge being downstairs alone and all. Now feeling a little more alert, I wandered into the kitchen and opened the fridge, where I proceeded to open a can of Coke to drink whilst waiting. Now, had I been in the front room, I would have seen it coming, but I was too busy chugging on my Coke to hear anything approaching me from behind. I had just enough time to catch a low thud. Then, everything went black. I came to after what seemed like hours later and in a place I didn't recognize. I was in some kind of warehouse, or at least what it looked like. I wasn't alone. There were other kids there, as well as the kid from next door. He was just as much of a douche as I was, and he too was just as confused. "Where are we?" asked Darius. "I don't know, but I think we should shout for help," I replied. I started to yell for help at the top of my lungs. This inspired other kids to begin crying out for help too. After minutes of ear-splitting noise, our captor made her appearance. That's right, you heard correctly. Our abductor was a woman. But not just any woman, as we soon discovered to our surprise. A loud screeching emitted from the doorway as a huge metal door slid open. In the doorway there stood a middle-aged woman wearing one of those god-awful Christmas jumpers. She had brown eyes and long, wavy brown hair. She was a round, chubby-looking lady with a stern expression on her face. It was now we were to find out who this bitch was and why we were here. "Hello, children. Does anyone know who I am?" inquired the serious-looking lady. As there was no reply, the burly woman continued, "I am Mrs. Claus. and I am Santa's wife. You are all here for one reason. As you know, Santa has a naughty and nice list. Every single year, this list keeps growing with every child that is born. The list, as you would imagine, is very, very long, and to check it twice takes longer every year, she continued. This task in itself is a hard one and keeps Santa busy for months on end. The naughty list is growing bigger with every passing year, and reading it is more and more upsetting and heartbreaking for Santa to read. It's growing because all you little brats refuse to behave and be good for your mothers and fathers. As Santa is getting older and the list makes him ill to keep reading it, I decided to take care of this problem myself, she said with a sadistic grin. Seems my husband is far too gentle and kind-hearted to sort this out. Back in the 1800s and 1900s, at least he held his side of the promise and left coal in all your stockings. But because of the size of the list, he gave up as he felt there would be no teaching you ungrateful little fools a lesson anymore. That's why I am here. That's why you are here. I realized putting pieces of coal in your stockings is ultimately pointless, as you will never learn. This led me to thinking. So I also noticed the list of items you all want grows with every new child that enters this world. Our elves struggle to make everything in time. That's rubbish. Our parents buy our presents, retorted a blonde-haired little boy from amongst the huge crowd of young faces. Silence! Escort that kid to the incinerator room and put him to work cleaning the ash pit, screamed the lady, clearly enraged by the boy's ignorance. To cut a long story short, you are all here to work for a full year in the workshops making the toys that you all receive at Christmas. Maybe from the hard work, you'll realize just how hard it is to make you happy. You should all know two things. A year in Lapland takes only an evening to go by in your world. Secondly, you're here to work. Behave yourselves and you will go home. Let me make it easier to understand. You will all go home once the year is out. Behave and stay as children. Be naughty and become one of the toys you will all learn to make. And your parents will forget you wherever their children are. Your choice. Elves, take them away, announced Mrs. Claus. We were all taken to our rooms that only had a bed and wardrobe with several sets of the same uniform. Not exactly an elf uniform, as it lacked color. Browns, grays, droll greens, and other miserable colors. Geez, that woman was out to prove a point. We had to put these ugly outfits on, and then we were herded into the main workshop and split up. The workshop was more like a garage workshop, all dark and dreary. Nothing like I've seen in all those Christmas movies. I was taken to a part of the workshop where wood came through in log form. I had to pick up these logs with two other kids my size and feed them into a machine that cut it into smaller parts that made them easier to work with. Darius was one of the kids in my group. After a few days of solid work, I had come to a decision. As I actually loved my parents, I wanted to go back to them as their son. I have to be good from now on. A week or so went by. Same job every day, and I was beginning to see just how hard it was to keep making toys for kids all over the world. Joey, psst, whispered Darius. Hey Darius, what's up? I whispered back. A few of the kids on our floor are looking at escaping this place tonight. You want to join us? Asked the boy in a hushed tone. No, I daren't. I want to go back to my mom and dad when we're finished here. I don't want to make Mrs. Claus angry, I replied with fear. You're a chicken, he jeered at me. Well, you saw what happened to that kid when he was naughty, I explained. There's loads of us here. Who's gonna notice a few of us gone? Asked Darius. Well, you can try, but I want to go home to my mom and dad, I replied fearfully. Fine, suit yourself then. Don't cry when we get home before you, Darius retorted, quite disappointed. I continued my work in silence that night, just praying for the time when I get to see my parents again. While I was working there, I found out other kids had been naughty and heard the fates they suffered. 2 girls got work in the kitchens and stole some food from Mrs. Claus's private pantry. They were turned into gingerbread girls and eaten by the elves. One kid who got painting duties on the toy line refused to work and paint the tricycles, so he was turned into a painting and mailed to his parents. As far as I could recall, at least 12 kids have been turned into toys and packed away into the sack. I noticed Mrs. Claus had stayed true to her word so far. A week later, I was woken up one night by a huge commotion out in the hall. Someone was banging on the doors to the rooms and calling out names. It got to my door and called out my name. Joey McIntosh, called a name from the beginning of my door, followed by a huge bang. I got up and walked out into the hallway and looked around. I think Darius's escape with his friends had been discovered. This struck me as a roll call to work out who was missing. Mrs. Claus strode down the hallway and looked furious. "Everybody downstairs to the workshop, now!" bellowed the angry lady. We were herded downstairs to the workshop and made to stand in a circle around a huge machine. I heard screaming and shouting and glanced over in that direction. "Let me fucking go!" shouted Darius. The other escapees weren't so resistant. "Please let us go, we're so sorry," wailed the young boys, clearly distressed. They were being carried by gnomes. These guys weren't anything like the jolly little dudes you see in the back gardens across the world. These looked really tough and were very muscular and definitely not to be messed with. Mrs. Claus spoke up. "For the good girls and boys who are trying to change, I am very sorry. It turns out there are still some amongst you who just won't behave. Bring the naughty boys here." Darius and the other two boys were carried in front of the annoyed woman. "These 3 bad little boys decided to try and escape this punishment. I'm afraid you're all going to see just what happens." "Please let us go. We won't do it again. We're so sorry," cried the boys in panic. "Indeed you shall be. But I'm afraid no one will learn if I don't make an example of you. Put them in," announced the lady in an eerily calm voice. They were tossed in one by one. Although the screams were deafening and the image was harrowing, the noise soon died down as they went through the machine. A loud rumble was emitted by the contraption as the boys went through their transformation. The 2 boys emerged from the machine and there were big gasps from the assembled group as they saw what they had become. One was a jack-in-the-box with the boy's very lifelike face. Another boy came out as a nutcracker doll with a lifelike face nestled beneath a huge guard's hat. Darius had become something very fitting for his stupid behavior. A donkey. He was about the size of an Alsatian and looked better than any toy you could buy in a store. "As you can see, this is what will happen if you are naughty," Mrs. Claus explained. About a half year went by when I was walking back to my room after a long hard day of working when I noticed something on the wall that I had never seen before. The naughty list. As I browsed the names upon the list, something strange happened. A name on a particular page I was reading completely disappeared. Now I wondered if that's what happened to kids on the list when they were too naughty and turned into a toy or something else. As I was reading, a gnome passed me, also on the way to bed. "Excuse me, can I ask a question, please?" I said to the tired little man. "Sure, what is it?" he replied. "You know what happens to the names on this list when they disappear?" The gnome smiled a knowing smile at me and said, "I think you already know the answer, but do you want to know something the big lady doesn't want you to know?" "Yeah, what's that?" I inquired. "You know how Santa is a good man, while she is his bad side come alive. Legend has it that Santa refused to take toys to the children of a certain name of gypsies and had a curse placed on him that he must live with the darkest part of his ego, and that's exactly who Mrs. Claus is. She has made our lives hell too. We used to be happy people before coming here. Most of us have been changed for the worse by being here. Santa doesn't really have a wife. That's what everyone believes. But please, don't tell anyone what you know, because she will kill us one by one until she finds out who told you," he said with a shudder. "Oops, there's another naughty kid off the list," said the little guy, pointing at the disappearance of yet another name from the list. I was later to discover the name to go was a girl, who foolishly punched Santa's alter ego. She was then changed into a punching doll, the kind that rocks back up when you hit it. I chose to keep my head down and work hard to leave and see my mom and dad again. The time went fairly fast, and soon it was time again to leave. Boy, was I excited. Before we were to leave, we were gathered together for a final time. It was at this point we were all suspecting something bad was going to happen. Loads of little young faces looking round with a mixture of puzzled and frightened expressions on them. "What's happening? We've been good. We want to go home," several voices were saying frantically.
"Silence! Mrs. Claus has something to tell you all."
The squeaky voice of a bad gnome yelled over the gathering commotion. Mrs. Claus made her way to a makeshift platform constructed of sturdy wooden crates, looked at us all, and held aloft the list and finally spoke. "I know you're all excited and expecting to go home tonight, but the truth is, you're all on the naughty list. That is the reason you are here after all. You see, there was another reason you came here." She chuckled insanely. "Santa's elves have been struggling to cope with the increasing demands that all of you little brats have been making. And it seems all you kids have shown such promise and ability when given something to work for. I have decided to keep only the best workers here, despite me saying you were going home," she continued with a cruel sneer. I was devastated. All my hopes of returning back to my mom and dad were smashed to bits. The thing with working in the actual workshop is you'll never grow older or bigger. You'll fit right in with all those other elves, she announced with an air of abrupt self-satisfaction. But there is just one more matter we need to address right now. There were other children on the list who were naughty whilst they were here, but it was never bad enough to be dealt with at the time. Those names I call up shall return home, but not as they were expecting to. That's right. You'll return as toys or ornaments, and as soon as your parents open the box containing you, they'll forget they ever had you, she said with eerie cheerfulness. Step forward when your names are called. That having been said, she started calling names, and one by one they were brought forward in various states of despair. Maisie Jones, Christopher Bertrand, Stefan Kraus, Tang Filung, Josep Milovic, Anya Kiptik, Jonathan M. Temby. The list went on. I had to get out of there. Slowly, I started to shuffle backwards through the huge crowd to try and hide behind a machine out of sight and wait for my escape. Once at the back, I noticed a door was ajar and it wasn't guarded. This was my chance. I crawled out of the door without moving it, just as my name was called. What? What did I do? I heard Mrs. Claus repeating my name a second time, but by this time, I had reached the main door and I threw it open, triggering an alarm. I was now outside running for my life in the freezing cold and heavy snow. I heard dogs barking and squeaky voices of elves calling to the dogs to go faster. I reached the outskirts of a huge forest and I knew that my captors weren't far behind. Now I was darting between trees and jumping roots that climbed from the ground. I turned around just as a leather whip struck my left wrist. I looked down to see a huge welt in the shape of a reindeer emblazoned on my skin. I continued running, but failed to look up and slammed headfirst into a low-hanging tree branch. Everything went black. I woke up to the sound of a familiar voice calling my name. Joey, wake up. Are you okay? Wake up, please. It was my mom. What happened? Where am I? I asked, confused. You're in your bed, Joey. You hit your head off your bedside table, said my mother in a worried tone. I was home. How? When did I get back? Was it all just a bad dream? Nevertheless, I was overjoyed to be home again. My mom was wiping my forehead that was grazed from when I face-planted the corner of my table. It was bleeding at first, but now it was gone. Come on, honey. Let's go downstairs and see if Santa has been," said my mom excitedly. She got up and left my room. I went to the bathroom to wash my face, brush my teeth, and go to the toilet. As I was washing my hands, water ran over my left wrist and it stung. I looked down, and what did I see? The very same welt that was made by the engraved leather whip. I looked, and there it was, the reindeer. Upon closer inspection, though, I saw words beneath the reindeer. The words that read, "He's making a list, checking it twice. We will find out if you're naughty or nice." I decided to be good from that day forward. I made sure to be good. My wrist was a permanent reminder of my time with Mrs. Claus. So yes, the list does exist, and we are all on it. So I would advise you all to be good, or suffer as I did. Don't mess with Santa. His wife will make your life hell.
The following is a faithful reenactment that is based on a series of audio tape recordings, transcriptions of radio communications, and a copy of an uncensored police report I obtained from a source that, for reasons of personal safety, must remain anonymous. I've also included excerpts from an emotionally charged interview with the widow of a man who witnessed the events in question. The existence of these recordings and transcripts has been officially and repeatedly denied by the National Park Service, the FBI, local law enforcement, and a number of officials representing the U.S. military. However, despite the official stance that the incident was an elaborate hoax, the audio recorded that night by Park Ranger Matthew Golding was leaked by an unidentified source in the fall of 2010, along with the radio transcripts and the police report. The forbidden files were uploaded to an infamous website known for hosting controversial material. The illicit materials disappeared from the site in short order, but they have periodically resurfaced on other file-sharing websites over the years. If one is persistent enough, it is possible to find them. But if you do, be prepared to spend the rest of your life looking over your shoulder. People who obtain these files have a tendency to disappear. In the interest of staying both alive and well, I have chosen to omit the name of the national park where the incident occurred. I also took the liberty of altering both the names and exact ages of all parties involved. The location will be referred to as X National Park, and the witnesses shall be named as follows. Matthew Golding, 31, a National Park Service forest ranger and law enforcement officer. Jillian Bridgemore, 36, an NPS ranger, law enforcement officer, and a respected authority in wildland fire suppression. Nicholas Fazio, 53, a trusted volunteer who was manning the radio at the base of operations that evening. Maria Fazio, 48, a laborer at a local manufacturing facility and the wife of Nicholas Fazio. And Louis Delacroix, 42, a veteran fire lookout who was serving his 20th season in the watchtower. 3 people went missing that night, never to be seen again, and a 4th was found dead in his home only 3 days later. Maria Fazio discovered the body of her husband slumped over the kitchen table, his hand still wrapped around his coffee mug as his blood soaked into the morning newspaper. He had been shot in the back of the head with a .40 caliber firearm. The coroner initially stated that his death was a homicide, but the ruling was quickly changed to suicide by a self-inflicted gunshot wound. Maria Fazio was adamant that her husband had never owned a handgun. According to the uncensored police report, no weapon was found at the scene. So, who murdered Nicholas Fazio? and why was his murder covered up by the police?
I've never seen anything like it. They're... I answered to them to get out of there, but my compass was spinning in circles. I saw them floating over the treetops. Screaming. Dinky, I saw them screaming in the light.
Calm down, Lou. Listen, we're gonna get you out of there. We're gonna, just tell me again where...
Holy God, they're coming. Look to the southeast, do you see it? It's just gliding over the treetops like... Oh, do you see it?
Hey, what? Lewis, what is that? I can see, there's... And now it's changing colors. I lost sight of it. What do you see on your end? What's happening?
They're coming for me. Oh, I'm scared, Nicky.
You've got a shotgun in there. Use it if you have to, Lou. Don't think twice about it.
They don't care about no shotgun. Before they get me, I'm telling you right now, I will blow my goddamn head off.
My husband didn't own a gun. I would never allow one in the house. I mean, even if he did have a gun, how could he shoot himself like that, twice, in the back of the head? Yeah, they left that part out. He was shot twice, not once. He couldn't have done that to himself. Didn't make any sense. Yeah, after the ruling came out, I hounded them every damn day. Every day, I would call them no word of a lie every single day. I would go down there in person sometimes, and I demand they reopen the investigation. I mean, I even started calling the office of the governor. I wrote him letters. You know what they said to me? They said, stop calling. It isn't going to bring him back. Yeah, I want everyone to know they said that to me. The office of the governor said that to a grieving widow. Make sure that gets in there.
I will. Maria, why do you think they changed the cause of death in the coroner's report?
They were scared. And everyone I talked to, they sounded like they were afraid. I could hear it in their voices, so I stopped calling them. I mean, there was no point. No one was going to tell me the truth. And if they did, they'd end up like Nick. They'd be killed.
Shortly after 9 p.m., on a clear night in August of 2006, veteran fire lookout Louis Delacroix radioed the base of operations with a startling observation. An unidentified flying object had dropped from the darkening skies and landed in the woods roughly a mile north of the watchtower.
You really didn't see it? Touched down about 3 miles southeast of you, about a mile north of the tower. You didn't see nothing at all?
Negative. I didn't see anything unusual to the southeast. Was it a meteor? You know, a shooting star or something like that?
No, wasn't no meteor. I've seen a few meteors over the years, and it wasn't like that. It didn't streak across the sky, and it wasn't fast. It came down in a slow, controlled descent, nice and steady. I watched it fly parallel to the treetops, cruising along at maybe 20 miles an hour, and it dropped out of sight. I don't know, it wasn't a flare, and it weren't a parachute. I don't know what to tell you. I couldn't identify it.
Wow, that's really weird.
You're telling me? I have never seen anything like that before. And I've been watching the skies for 20 years. Can you maybe send someone out here?
I'll get a hold of Matt and Jillian.
Well, I don't know, Nicky. I think we got ourselves a UFO out here. I've never seen anything like that before in my entire life.
What do you mean, like a flying saucer or something? Come on, you can't be serious.
I saw what I saw. I don't know what to say. I'm a little freaked out, Nicky. Tell him to get out here quick. Just tell him it's an emergency.
Nick didn't come home that night. I tried to call him at least a dozen times, but he wouldn't answer the phone. I called the police and asked them to go check on him, and they told me, don't worry, everything's fine. And I asked them, how do you know that? You didn't even go out there yet. They just kept saying that everything was fine at the base and I should just go to bed.
What time did your husband come home?
He didn't get in until 2 o'clock the next afternoon. I was worried sick. He looked so tired, and there was something else too. Like, he had this blank look in his eyes. I think he was in shock. I asked him what happened, and the way he stared at me made goosebumps come up on my arms. He said, "They told me not to tell anyone, not even you."
Is this thing recording? Or do I have to... Oh, yeah, okay. Yeah. This is Officer Matthew Golding speaking. It's shortly after 9 p.m. on the of August 2006. I'm standing here with Jillian Bridgemore and Louis Delacroix, and, as I said, we're standing here outside the Watchtower in National Park. Jillian and I were called out to investigate something, something very unusual that was reported by Mr. Delacroix here. Lou, can you tell us what you saw? Unusual? Yeah, you could say that.
Mr. Delacroix has requested that we document this investigation with a tape recorder he found in the Watchtower. Louis, can you tell us what you saw this evening?
Yes, ma'am, I can. Right around 9 o'clock, 2100 hours, I seen a ball of light fall from the sky. It came down about a mile from here. It was pretty big. I'd say maybe 20 feet across in diameter. It turned all kinds of different colors as it came down. One sort of just running into the next, you know? It was pulsing and, I don't know how to describe it, really. The light was just sort of pulsing, going from green to blue, red, orange, all kinds of colors. I'll go on record right now and tell you something. I've been a fire lookout for a real long time, and I've never seen anything like that.
Do you believe in that sort of thing, Mr. Delacroix? UFOs and things of that nature?
I believe what I see with my own eyes, and I am telling you, I seen a ball of light come down from the sky. It flew over the trees in a straight, steady path for maybe 200 yards, and then it just dropped out of sight. I'm not saying it's aliens or something, but, well, hell, I don't know. I can only tell you what I saw.
Matt, no offense to Louis here, but I don't think this was much of an emergency.
Hold on just a damn minute. I am not a liar, ma'am. I'm telling you the truth. I've known Lou for a long time. If he says something landed out there in the woods, well, I believe he isn't lying to us. And we'll just say that. We might as well check it out. I am not some crazy wingnut. I saw what I saw. No, I know you aren't, Lou. Believe me, if it was anyone but you, I'd already be heading back. It's been a long day. I want to come too. I want to see it. I don't think that's a good idea.
Absolutely not.
Come on, I want to see it. I have a camera. Let me come with you.
If you fell off the back of the quad or something, I think we could be held liable. No way, we can't do that.
Please, I'm begging you over here. Come on. I want to see this thing. I want to take 100 pictures and show the whole goddamn world. I promise I will not be a pain in your ass, and I won't do anything stupid. Look, Lou, I'll be honest here. I don't think we're going to find an actual physical object from outer space in those woods. We'll take you out there, show you that nothing's there, and back to the Watchtower you go.
He's not supposed to abandon his post at the tower. This is... You know what? He's your responsibility then. He can ride with you.
You're gonna see that I ain't a liar. You're gonna see that for yourself. Mark my words.
Nick didn't say much when he got in. He lay down on the couch and fell asleep. I was really worried about him. Right around 6 o'clock, I took a break from watching over him to go have a smoke, and I saw an unfamiliar vehicle parked a little ways down the street. A big black SUV with tinted windows. I felt like someone was watching me. Made me nervous. When I went back in, Nick was sitting up on the couch. He pointed to the window and said, "Are they out there?" I knew right away what he was talking about. I told him about the SUV, and his face got real pale. He started pacing around the house. He says, "They don't want me to tell anyone." Well, I grabbed him by the arm and asked him, "Tell anyone what, Nick? What happened out there last night?" And he just shook his head and whispered in my ear, "I can't say anything, they're listening." I felt the hairs raise on the back of my neck. I grabbed a notepad and wrote, "Who's listening?" He shook his head again and grabbed the pen out of my hand, and he wrote, "They can see us." And he ran the tap over the notepad in the kitchen sink. He wadded it up in a ball and threw it in the garbage.
Did you look for this notepad after your husband's murder?
Yes. I searched for it after they took him away. It wasn't there. I dumped the bag out on the kitchen floor and looked through all the garbage, but it just wasn't there. It was gone.
Maria, who do you believe was responsible for the death of your husband?
The real question is, who ordered his execution? Because it was an execution. My husband knew something he wasn't supposed to know. They were worried he would tell someone. That's why he wouldn't say anything. He was afraid they would find out with their surveillance equipment. He was trying to protect me.
What do you think would have happened if Nick had told you the truth?
I think you know the answer to that. One more death to these people? Our lives don't matter to people like that.
Who are you referring to when you say that? Who are they? And what are they trying to hide?
I think you already know the answer to that one, too.
Shortly after 9 p.m., Matthew Golding, Jillian Bridgemore, and Louis Delacroix left the watchtower on 2 all-terrain vehicles, following a rough trail that meanders on a northwesterly path through the forest. Before they left, Louis radioed back to base to advise Nick Fazio that the trio intended to venture out and locate the mysterious object which had descended from the sky. It was the second last transmission sent from the watchtower that evening.
Goddamn, that's something, isn't it? That's really something. You guys be careful, Lou.
Well, I just want to get some pictures, Nicky. I ain't going to walk up and touch the damn thing. We're not stupid.
Listen, Louis, jokes aside, if you find what you're looking for out there, don't get too close, you know? Be cautious. You don't know anything about it. You don't know what it is or where it came from. It could be dangerous.
I already told you I am not an idiot. Damn it, this is big, man. This is huge. We are gonna be famous. TV, talk shows, and all that jazz. Reporters.
Famous? You get a clear picture of some aliens out there, and I bet we'll all friggin' disappear. I mean it, Lou. You guys be careful.
We'll be fine. Don't worry about it. Over and out, buddy. We'll talk soon.
The time is, it's 9:24 p.m. We parked the quads on the side of the trail and went into the woods on foot. We are approximately 1 mile north of the tower, and we can see a light shining through the trees. It's... I don't know what to make of this. Jillian?
I think I should apologize to Louis over here. There's an object in the woods, about 200 or 300 yards to the west of the trail. I can't see its shape, but it's a brightly lit object, and it seems to be changing colors in a pattern. We're too far away to make out any detail, but this thing, it's pretty big. I don't know how Nick didn't see this thing. It's very bright.
I told you, I ain't a liar. Well, no one ever called you a liar, we just didn't... Wait. What the hell is that? I can hear something. I can feel it. Like it's...
I can feel it too. Can you smell that? There's a weird smell, almost like ozone. I can taste it on my tongue.
Oh, okay, let's consider our options here. I am not sure if getting close and taking pictures is such a great idea, Lou. We should keep our distance.
Shh. Do you hear that? Something's coming this way.
Oh, shit on that. Let's go. Louis, do not leave my sight. Louis! Louis! Wait!
We have to go. Come on.
Okay, just a second. A massive search operation was quickly organized to locate the missing rangers and the fire lookout. But after 9 days, the searchers were forced to throw in the towel. Every acre of the park was carefully combed for any clues that might shed some light on their fate. In the end, all they could find was a small scrap of cloth that may have come from a ranger's uniform, a single button, the tire tracks from their all-terrain vehicles, the tape recorder, and Matthew Golding's 9mm pistol. The scrap of cloth was discovered a few yards outside the burn spot. It was snagged in a low-hanging branch, affirming that at least one of the rangers came very close to the landing site. The button was on the ground nearby, partially melted. It was impossible to determine which of the missing persons these items may have belonged to, but it is almost certain they both came from a ranger's uniform. The tape recorder was laying in the burned vegetation near the edge of the eye. The outer casing of the tape recorder was badly melted, but the cassette inside proved to be largely unscathed. The discovery of the firearm occurred by pure accident. A member of the search team happened to look up at the right time, and she caught sight of a pistol dangling from a tree branch. The branch in question was 79 feet in the air. The firearm was determined to belong to Matthew Golding. Upon closer examination, the searchers made a grisly discovery. There was a crust of blackened organic material attached to the grip, which was eventually identified as being a thick layer of human skin. It appeared that Golding's weapon was torn from his grasp after being heated to searing temperatures. The weapon itself, however, appeared to have sustained only minor damage. The entire event is shrouded in mystery, but the strangest piece of the puzzle is the area known as the burn spot. The burn spot is a roughly circular patch of land where all the vegetation was seared to a crisp by an unknown source of heat. The trees along the border of the burn spot had been singed all the way up to the uppermost branches on one side, but were largely undamaged on the other side. In the middle of this 40-foot wide patch of devastation, there was a perfect circle of bleached-out soil that was dubbed the Eye by the search team. The undergrowth located within this area hadn't been scorched, but it was uniformly crushed into the forest floor in a swirling circular pattern. The Eye reaches 12 inches deep into the soil, and it measures over 20 feet in diameter. According to the police report, the ground inside the Eye remained warm to the touch for over 72 hours. There was a quiet concern among the ranks of the search team that the area might have been irradiated, but there was no elevated levels of harmful radiation detected within either the Eye or the surrounding burn spot. It has been reported that, even years later, nothing will grow within the burn spot. Wildlife has been observed giving it a very wide berth, including birds and flying insects, who will actively change their flight path to avoid crossing through the airspace above the affected area. Unknown persons were observed taking soil and vegetation samples from the burn spot on the day after the abduction, But the results of any analysis that might have been performed on these samples remains unknown. How could it be possible to burn such a large area of dry undergrowth without sparking a raging wildfire? The entire region was in the grip of a heat wave, and there had been minimal rainfall in the weeks leading up to the incident. In those conditions, a stray ember from a campfire could easily start a devastating inferno. One can only wonder about the nature of an energy field which could accomplish such a feat, and how it might be produced, and for what purpose. No one knows the true answer beyond a select few, an anonymous and faceless cabal that protects its secrets with money, intimidation, and cold-blooded murder.
Oh, shit. Okay. I don't know what time it is. My watch stopped. Radio doesn't work either. Just a lot of static. Lou, he's gone. We lost him. There was something coming at us. I don't know. We could hear like a... I don't even know how to describe it.
It was a deep hum. I could hear something pushing through the undergrowth, and that humming sound. My head started to hurt. It was hard to breathe.
Lou took off in a different direction, and we lost him. He's still out there somewhere.
I'm sorry, but I'm leaving right now. There's no way I'm going back out there.
We can't leave without him, Jill. Do you know how much?
We never should have brought him with us in the first place. Are you out of your goddamn mind? Whatever's out there in the woods, it's beyond us. Way beyond us. Who knows what could happen if it sees us?
Look, Jill, I have known Lou for years, and I can't do it. There's no choice.
There is a choice. I choose to go home tonight, and you should do the same. Whatever or whoever is out there, they might mean us harm and they might not. Sometimes I'll step on a bug by accident, and sometimes I do it on purpose. Either way, that bug is dead. You get what I'm saying?
We're still recording here, Jill.
I don't give a shit. You can do whatever you want, but I'm out of here.
No. Stop right there and drop the key.
Hey! What the fuck are you doing pointing your gun at me?
Put your weapon on the ground. Bear spray, knife, radio. Put everything on the ground. No! Shut up! Do not talk. Take 6 big steps backward and turn around with your hands in the air.
What are you doing? What the hell is going on here, Matt?
If you speak again, I'll kill you. Do you understand? Good. Keep your mouth shut and do as I say. Start walking.
Oh, I'm pretty much an expert by now, sure. Ask whatever you want.
Let's talk about Matthew Golding for a minute.
Well, I guess people are gonna think this is crazy, but it's all crazy, so, we know that Matthew Golding was born in 1975. He moved to the state of with his family when he was a teenager, and he started in the park in the fall of 1998. He appeared almost 8 years later on the night of what happened, and that was the last anyone ever saw of him. Are you with me so far?
Yes, ma'am. Please continue.
Well, a couple of fishermen found a skull in a ravine back in 2011. It was identified as belonging to Matthew Golding. He'd been shot in the back of the head. Now, at first they were estimating the year of his death to be sometime in 2002, but that got changed to 2006 in the report.
So, you're suggesting that Matthew died 4 years before the abduction? How is that possible? His voice can be heard numerous times in the recording.
The man you hear in the recording wasn't the real Matthew Golding. He was dead long before then. Mr. Golding was murdered and replaced with a look-alike in 2002. The man on the tape is an imposter.
Where would they find someone who could look and act so closely to the real person? And why? It's been documented that Matthew came home for the Christmas holidays every year, and even his own family didn't notice anything off about him.
There's been a lot of very strange sightings in that park over the years. Look it up for yourself. It's been going on for at least 100 years, maybe even longer. I think they've been watching the park for a very long time now, and they'll protect their secret any way they can. Now, there was a letter that Matthew wrote to his parents in March of 2001, and I've seen this letter with my own eyes, where he says he saw a strange light in the sky. He thought it was Venus at first, but it fell from the sky and landed somewhere in the park. That's what he says in the letter. He says, "I thought to myself, Venus is falling." So he did see something unusual, and maybe it was more than once. Maybe he told someone about it, and they turned out to be the wrong person, you know? Maybe they were reading his mail. They can do that. They can make you disappear, and they can even replace you. They have unlimited money and resources, these people. They can do whatever they want.
What is the secret they're trying to protect?
I know what people think when you say something like this, but I do believe there are other civilizations out there, and they're much more advanced than we are. That's not the secret, though. The secret is they've been coming to our planet for a very long time. They come here for reasons we don't understand, and they do what they do, and there's nothing we can do to stop them. That's what they're trying to hide from the public, you understand. The real secret isn't that we're being, interfered with, you know? The secret is that we don't know what they want, and we're helpless to stop them.
I have one more question concerning Matthew Golding. Why do you think he recorded himself committing a felony by holding a fellow law enforcement officer hostage? You would think someone in his position would want to get rid of Jillian and Lewis without leaving any evidence behind.
Well, he wasn't worried about the tape falling into the wrong hands. He was probably going to send it straight to a lab somewhere for analysis if things have turned out the way he'd planned. He was going to kill Jillian and Lewis, no doubt about it. He wasn't going to let them get out of there alive.
It might have been better for them if he had. The final minute of the tape is absolutely terrifying. I've listened to it 12 times, and it still makes the hair stand up on the back of my neck.
I feel for Jillian and Lewis, but as far as I'm concerned, that murdering son of a bitch got what he deserved, sir. He got exactly what he deserved.
There's an opening on the side. The fucking thing, it's changing all the time I mean, it's a circle, then it's like a star. Doesn't stop changing, it's... Oh, fuck. It just opened up.
What do you mean? Like a door or something?
No, it's I don't know, it's not like a door. There's... out of the opening. Oh, it hurts to look at. I don't know how. Oh, wait a minute. What's that? Shit.
What's going on? Talk to me, Lewis. What do you see?
Something just came out of there. I can't, I mean, there's more. There's even more of them. Oh my God, sweet Jesus, the way they move.
Calm down. I called the cops, so help is on the way. Just lay low, okay? Stay away from the...
They know I'm here. They know I'm talking to you.
Can they see you?
They can see everything.
The imposter who was masquerading as Matthew Goldman led Jillian Bridgemore through the woods for approximately 17 minutes. During that time, no audible communication between them was captured on tape. The disquieting hum that could be heard earlier in the recording reappears, and it grows steadily louder, as if Matthew and his captive were inadvertently drifting closer and closer to the object as they search for Louis Delacroix. At one point, Louis can be heard yelling their names in the background, suggesting he was in close enough proximity to the Rangers to be picked up by the cheap microphone in the tape recorder. Although these conclusions are largely speculation, they generate two very puzzling questions. How did the imposter not realize he was wandering too close to the landing site? And why didn't he answer Lewis when he was obviously close enough to be heard? It can be speculated that the object in the woods was exerting some kind of temporal disturbance in the immediate area of the landing site, distorting time and space in a way that would confuse the senses. It's possible Lewis was walking almost right beside them, but they were unable to see or perceive each other in any tangible manner. I think it's highly unlikely the agent posing as Matthew would knowingly approach the object, as he would have been well aware of the dangers it posed to any earthly being that might stray too close. I believe he simply became disoriented and wandered in the wrong direction, with disastrous results. Although I grieve the loss of Jillian Bridgemore, I'm afraid I have to agree with Maria Fazio concerning the fate of the murderous imposter. That son of a bitch had it coming.
I can't see. Stop right there. We have... Oh, shit. Oh, holy fuck.
Oh my god. The light.
I was in the shower when it happened. He was sitting at the table, drinking his coffee. He had the morning newspaper open in front of him. When I, got out of the shower, he was slumped over the table. His... Oh, God, the blood. The newspaper was soaking up his blood.
You didn't hear any gunshots?
I thought maybe I had heard something, but it wasn't a really loud bang, you know, like the bang from a gunshot. Your guns are very loud. There's no way I wouldn't hear 2 shots over the sound of the running water, not unless the killer was using a suppressor. I've read about those things. It's not like in the movies. They change the sound of the gunshot.
Tell me about the encounter you had after the funeral.
Well, it was about a week after the funeral, and I was just sort of moping around the house. I wasn't really thinking straight. I was still trying to make some sense of it all, you know? Anyway, so this big guy with a crew cut came knocking on the door that morning. He was wearing dark coveralls and mirrored sunglasses. I thought he was with the power company at first, but then I saw he was holding a flower arrangement and a gift bag. He gave me his big smile when I opened the door, and he said, "Sorry to intrude like this, Maria, but they wanted to offer their condolences." I just stared at him like, what the hell is this? You know? I said, "Pardon me? Who are you?" And he handed me the flowers and the gift bag. I said, "What's this? Tell me who you are." But he was already walking away. He got into a cargo van and drove away. And I just stood there and watched him go with my mouth hanging open. And it was so weird, you know? It was just really scary. I was shaking all over.
What was in the bag?
It was my hairbrush. I keep it in the vanity in my bedroom. I had just used it the night before. I didn't even know it was gone.
They came into your bedroom that night as you slept, and they took your hairbrush to send a message. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, that's exactly what I'm saying. It was a message. Look, this is how they do it, all right? This is the kind of thing they do. If I told you they broke into my house and stole my brush, well, you'd think I was crazy, wouldn't you? And that's how they do something like this. They want to intimidate you. It was definitely a message. They wanted me to know they can get rid of me anytime they see fit. Locked doors mean nothing to them. If they ever even suspected I had some evidence against them, they'd get rid of me in a heartbeat.
It is widely believed that Louis Delacroix witnessed the abduction of Jillian and the imposter. After witnessing this traumatic event, he was somehow able to find his way back to the watchtower. What follows is the last transmission between Louis and Nicholas Fazio in its entirety. It makes for a very disturbing listening experience, and listener discretion is advised.
Nicky, do you copy? Nick!
Lou, what's wrong?
We went out there and, okay, so, we went out there, right? And there's something in the woods, Nicky. It's, and something was coming after us. We all ran, and I lost them in the woods, and I was yelling for them, but anything at all. Like, I couldn't see right. I didn't feel right. Everything was just I don't know. Everything was just completely off.
Where is Matt and Jillian, Lou? Are they with you now?
Never seen anything like it. There are ants to them, and to get out of there, but my compass was spinning in circles. I saw them floating over the treetops. Screaming, Nicky. I saw them screaming in the light.
Calm down, Lou. Listen, we're gonna get you out of there. We're gonna, just tell me again where...
Holy God. They're coming. Look to the southeast, do you see it? It's just gliding over the treetops like... Do you see it?
Hey, what? Louis, what is that? I can see... There's... And now it's changing colors. I lost sight of it. What do you see on your end? What's happening?
They're coming for me. I'm scared, Nicky.
You've got a shotgun in there. Use it if you have to, Lou. Don't think twice about it.
They don't care about no shotgun. Before they get me, I'm telling you right now, I will blow my goddamn head off.
Don't do that. Lou, what the fuck is going on over there?
There's an opening on the side. The fucking thing, it's changing all the time, like it's a circle. Then it's like a star. Doesn't stop changing. It's a... Oh, fuck. It just opened up.
What do you mean? Like a door or something?
No, it's... I don't know. It's not like a door. There's... Out of the opening. Oh, it hurts to look at. I don't know how. Wait a minute. What's that? Oh, shit.
What's going on? Talk to me, Louis. What do you see?
Something just came out of there. I can't... There's more. There's even more of them. Oh, my God. Sweet Jesus, the way they move.
Calm down. I called the cops, so help is on the way. Just lay low, okay? Stay away from the...
They know I'm here. They know I'm talking to you.
Can they see you?
They can see everything.
Stay with me, Lou. Don't do anything rash. Just... Lou! Louis! What happened? Lou! Oh my God. Jesus Christ. Lou? Who the hell are you? You're not a cop. I called the cops.
Mr. Fazio? Step away from the radio and come with us. Right now, please. Turn off the...
At this time, there still hasn't been any formal acknowledgement from any authorities at a regional, state, or federal level that would suggest this incident had ever occurred. Maria Fazio continues to strive for the truth behind her husband's murder, and the families of Matthew Golding, Gillian Bridgemore, and Louis Delacroix continue to mourn the mysterious loss of their loved ones. They desperately seek closure, but this has been denied to them again and again by everyone from the chief of police to the governor, all the way up to the Secretary of Defense. The truth will probably never be revealed, but someone, somewhere, knows what happened on that night in August of 2006. It is my hope they will eventually find the courage to come forward with the final pieces of this daunting and sinister puzzle. However, I don't believe it will ever happen. Some secrets are simply far too dangerous to be revealed. I'd like to personally thank you, the listeners, for joining me this evening. I would like to end with a blood-chilling anecdote of my own. Before I began working on this documentary, I was largely skeptical of this story. It sounded like a hybrid between a conspiracy theory and an urban legend. However, shortly before I began production on this documentary, I had an encounter that changed my mind entirely. A man came knocking at my door 2 weeks before production was scheduled to begin. It was a large man with a crew cut, wearing dark coveralls and mirrored sunglasses. When I answered the door, he shoved a cardboard box into my hands, gave me a cryptic smile, and walked away. I yelled, "Hey, come back here," but he didn't even turn around. He jumped into a white cargo van with darkly tinted windows and drove off, here one moment and gone the next. If I wasn't left standing on my porch with the box in my hands, I would have been tempted to believe it had never happened at all. The encounter was over in a matter of seconds. I wasn't sure if I should even open the box, but I finally gathered enough courage to take a look. There were 2 items inside. One was a copy of the script for this documentary. At this point, I still haven't even made a printed copy for myself. I was chilled to the bone by this discovery. But the other item was even worse. It was a bullet, and my name had been etched into the casing.
The first time was probably the least tragic, or at least the least painful. The least haunting as well. It was 3 years ago. My health had taken a nosedive. Cancer, stage 3. I'd been a chain smoker since the end of my freshman year of high school. Plus, I worked part-time at a warehouse that primarily manufactured household chemicals. Asbestos. Ain't that a bitch, right? Anyway, my health had been bad for almost a year, about 10 months by that point, and frankly, I was pretty happy when the time finally came when the pain could be gone for good. Death is only a gateway. My family, by which I mean my brother Randy, and my wife Jasmine, the only 2 of my family, who were even around by that point, along with my dog Fenrir, were at my bedside when it happened. Jasmine, of course, cried. Randy had a solemn, stoic look on his face, trying to hold himself together. I remember the last thing I would hear being Jasmine's voice singing, "Cold blows the wind. Cold blows the wind, o'er my true love. Cold are the drops of rain." Her voice is so beautiful. I do as much for my true love as any young girl may, just like she did on the beach that night. The darkness crept from the edges of my eyes, slowly, painlessly. There's no pain in death. I couldn't feel anything more. My body was numb, my brain gone. I could only hear her voice, softly fading with the rest of me. This was it. It was finally time. It would all end quietly, peacefully. Death is only a gateway. One kiss from your lily-white lips. That was as far as I got before I was gone. I heard nothing anymore, felt nothing anymore. It was dark, quiet, empty. It was, well, there was nothing anymore, if that makes any kind of sense. Through the tunnel. It's hard, of course, to really explain what it was like, dying. I was, in a way, conscious, I guess you could call it, but I couldn't feel or see or do anything. The other side of the tunnel? I was just there. I don't know how long it was like this either once I'd passed. Seconds, minutes, hours, days, years? Time had no weight anymore, no definition. There was no more time. The light at the end. I was adrift in darkness. Where's the light? I wasn't scared. I couldn't feel fear. I wasn't even confused. I couldn't feel confusion. Where's the other side? I couldn't feel. What's on the other side? I was alone, in the boundless dark, holed up with disembodied thoughts that buzzed erratically, thoughts that I couldn't voice. Thoughts that, like time, had no consequences of what was around me, of what lay ahead of me. Nothing. Death is not an end. I remember something bright in the distance. I don't know what I'd say that I saw it. To say, I couldn't see. Maybe perceived is the best way to put it. It was there, just like how I was, just there. And I knew it was there. Facing it, sensing it. That's it. I sensed it there. I have to cross the tunnel, cross the bridge. Among seemingly distant recitals of every thought, every idea, every memory, even that I had once in life, came the question, what is that? The gateway's open. I, for lack of any other way of putting it, wondered what it was, this bright speck in a sea of eternal black. What is it doing here? Step into the light. I seemed drawn towards it, hypnotized, unable to bring myself away from it. It became brighter and brighter. One chapter's ending becomes another's beginning. A series of things began gradually happening to me. I could feel a sharp, burning feeling pervade all across my consciousness. I could feel. Next, I could hear a mixed cacophony of high-pitched screams, like those of frightened or pained women and children at the same time. This morphed into sounds of laughter, like the laughter of a baby, like the laughter of men and women. I then heard the sounds of angered men and women shouting. I could hear. The speck, the aura, burned brighter and brighter. It began spreading, canvassing the void ahead. It soon developed to become blinding. I could see. Crossed the bridge. I was overwhelmed, like I was experiencing all of this, these sensations, all for the first time again, like I'd never been alive before. Do it! Cross the bridge! Like I was being born again. Death is not an end. The light became brighter, brighter, expanding closer and closer. I went from seeing nothing but a black void to seeing a cloud of white-hot light. I could see the light, the gate. The sounds became more defined. They sounded normal, some now even sounding mundane in nature. I could hear it all, every cry, every gasp, whisper, laugh, moan, and even every shaking breath, all of it. I could hear it all. The gateway is open. All at once, I took it all in, basking against the heavenly sea of white. I tried not to really focus much on it, to just take it all in without trying to hear or distinguish any particular sound. It didn't work, though. Eventually, I heard the cadence of syllables taking form. I recognized it, that it was a man and a woman. The man was pushing at the woman, who was groaning in pain. "Push!" I heard him cry. "Come on, push!" The gateways are open. I soon felt something begin twisting in me, inside the cocoon of white. I could feel like I was being compacted, but felt myself getting forced onward toward the sounds and the ever-expanding light. "Push!" I heard again from ahead. "The doors are open. Come on, honey, you can do this," the man's voice says. My body further shrunk. I could feel it devolving, degenerating, until it was the body of an infant again. The gateway is open. Something can get in or out. My mind fogged, evolving into that of a baby. I was becoming a baby again. "Come on, honey, push!" Woman screamed in pain, and I was forced further forward. Something else can get out. That's it. Deep breaths. I was forced further and further. Something's following me. The force pushing me forward became violent. The woman's screams were shrill, ear-splitting. With one last aggressive push, I was sent rocketing from the white abyss forward into an unknown point where the sounds were originating from. It's right behind me. As I neared the breaching point, I felt an overwhelming rush of fresh oxygen flood my lungs. It was painful, and I opened my mouth to cry out. Bright fluorescent lighting assaulted my eyes, and I was forced to close them. "Come on, Edna," the man's voice urged excitedly. "You're almost there, just one more push." Deep down in the farthest region of my mind, which still contained my former consciousness, well, the fragment of it that hadn't quite yet faded away, something struck me as familiar about that name. It was my mother's name, Edna. I was being born again. Something else was trying to get through. Just as I was to breach the void entirely, I could feel something fly past me. Whatever it was felt both blistering hot and deathly cold at the same time, as it seemed to kind of pass through me like a rush of wind. I didn't see what it was, blinded by the artificial light ahead. Instead, I heard the woman, my mother, cry out in more pain than ever before as she forced me forward one last time with one last powerful push. I was free. I opened my eyes only to immediately close them again, overwhelmed by the introduction of both light and fresh air. My lungs and my chest felt like they were being compressed, and I cried out, wailing just to try and take in fresh air again. It got out. "It's a boy," I heard another voice declare. "It's free." Cold, frigid air stung all across my skin. I wailed louder and louder until eventually, exhausting myself and falling asleep. I remember quietly drifting off, feeling the somewhat familiar feeling of my mother's warm, tender skin as she held me against her chest. Where is it? Where did it go? That was how it started, how my life began. When it ended. I know. That makes absolutely no sense to you, does it? Trust me, it never really got any easier for me to understand either. Unfortunately, this is also where things only get harder to explain, too. Death is only a gateway. I more or less lived again. I grew up again, went to school when I turned 6, just like before. Got a part-time job when I was 16, drive-through at Burger King, just like I had before. At 17, I dropped out and got a job at a warehouse, full-time, just like last time. I guess you could say I didn't really learn anything. Hell, I was even smoking again by that point, at least half a pack a day. Of course, I didn't understand really what was happening either. I mean, how was this even possible? How was I living my life again? Why was I living my life again? One chapter ended, another began. Despite this lingering deep down, I more or less lived a happy life again, just like I did before. I'd occasionally have moments of what felt like déjà vu, occasional moments that felt familiar, moments that I knew I'd lived before. I couldn't ever really comprehend why at the time, though. Again, only a feeling. The fragments never faded away. This would be when I first saw it. It was on the day of my wedding. I was 22 by then, and I'd been engaged to Jasmine for at least 6 months. And I knew, just like I knew before, that she was the one who I wanted to live out my life with. The pastor was in the middle of wedding the two of us when, out of the corner of my eye, far off in the distance, I honestly am surprised I was able to see it at all. I saw it. Something was left when I passed away. It was like a spot, a stain. A tiny black dot that stood miles away from the lake where we were being married. I could just vaguely see from where I was at that it had the shape of a person, yet I knew it wasn't. Something got out when I passed through the gate. It was tall, dark, and transparent in a way. It looked like it could have been someone's shadow, not seeming to have a solid form of its own. It was something that was just there, watching me. It got out. What the hell? Philip Horn. Pastor's voice jolted my focus again. Do you take Jasmine Wyatt to be your lawfully wedded wife? To have and to hold. It's watching. In sickness and in health. It's moving. Till death do you part. His voice sounded somewhat distant, losing myself in thought. I looked back to Jasmine, her beautiful, smiling face, still seeing the thing, the shadow in the corner of my right eye. Closer. I do, I said, smiling, still eyeing the shadow in the distance. He then went through the vows with her. I continued to stare into her eyes as he spoke. She smiled back at me. It's getting closer. With all her adorable, dimple-cheeked smile, the sweetest damn thing I've ever seen in all my lives, she replied, I do. You may now kiss the bride. Slowly, I brought my lips down to meet hers. She closed her eyes and raised up to meet me. It's getting too close. Our lips met for a brief instant. I felt the ecstasy wash through me. I'd done it. I married the love of my life. Again. Suddenly, I felt my body go cold. My skin had broken out completely into goosebumps. My lungs felt starved, too, and I began coughing and wheezing. Phil, Jasmine cried. Phil, are you okay? I was soon surrounded by the guests. Randy was trying to give me the Heimlich maneuver, apparently thinking I was choking on something. I couldn't respond, only continue wheezing. I began to panic. What's happening? What the hell's going on? It's got me. I can't breathe. It's got me. Soon dark clouds spread across my eyes as I began going limp. My wheezing became weaker and weaker until dying off completely. I couldn't feel anything again. Everything was dark again. Empty. Quiet. Not the end. Like before, I was alone, drifting in a seemingly endless sea of eternal black. Adrift in nothingness. Only a gateway. Alone, save for the thoughts that ran amok in my once again disembodied consciousness. I guess because it was my second time experiencing them like this, now feeling a bit more familiar with what was going on with them, I actually made an effort to try and listen to them this time around. Of course, familiar or not, they were still hard as hell to comprehend. Granted, of course, the existence of my consciousness as a whole at that moment was racking my mind anyhow. They weren't uniformed or organized in any way. They were clustered, jumbled, mixing and twisting, like they were all being shouted at me by at least 100 different people, all at the same time. What I could make of it, though, was that it was shouting moments of my life to me, particularly moments of life that had been played out multiple times, repeated across both lives so far, which was a lot. As I said before, not much actually changed the second time around. They don't go away. Soon the process from before repeated itself. I saw the light again, the white void, which was then followed by my morphing again into a baby, delivered from my mother's womb. And just like before, just before I'd enter the world for a third time, I felt it, them, whatever, flow through and pass me out from the void as well. And yes, the third time started out much the same as the other two times. Again, at times, I'd feel those same senses of déjà vu whenever I was reliving moments of my life that had been done before in the previous lives. Obviously now with double the potency. This time I didn't even make it as far as my wedding before it happened again. The chapters get shorter, but the story never ends. It was just another day at the warehouse. I should mention, realizing I hadn't before, that my role there had always been as a loader of the trucks. This meant I would be operating the forklifts. Well, this particular day, I was supposed to load at least 1,400 pieces onto the truck for shipment. I'd gotten at least half of that order loaded and ready for delivery when I saw it again. Saw them again. This time there were two of them. They both stood in a distance. One stood at the far end of the main hallway, while the other stood off in the middle of the loading dock outside, past the trucks. The both of them just stood there, their two hollow white eyes boring into me, and I could feel it, even from a distance. It felt cold, bitter, and even a bit menacing, like they didn't want me there. I crossed the gateway, like I was somehow making them suffer. They should have faded. And it was obvious they were only there for me. I found this out when I watched others pass right through them, when walking to and from the loading areas where they were, not at all seeming to notice them. I was the only one that could see them. A new chapter starts when one ends. What the hell are they? I wondered, staring at them, one in the corner of each eye. What are they wanting? One's on the move. What are they doing? The other one's moving now. My mind was racing with all these questions when a new thought further sent them into a spiral. I had a brief vision of the previous life. It was broken, and I'd have written it, and all of this, for that matter, off as a crazed pipe dream if it weren't for the way I've seen this and that and later events connect now. If it wasn't for how familiar they were to me in that moment. They're getting closer again. How it was like they were. Closer. Like they were. Too close. They're getting too close again. Like they were a part of me. Before I knew it, though, more instances of déjà vu hit me, when an all too familiar chill gripped me, sucking the air out of me and causing me to cough and gasp for air again, seizing and convulsing. As I was operating the forklift when it happened, I ended up driving it forward into the loading area and smashing into the side of one of the trucks. Instantly, everything was dark again. It was a lot more sudden this time, abrupt. In fact, that I think of it now, that was probably the quickest death I've experienced. The most painless. All the same, though, I was lost again in a boundless eternal night, surrounded by the frantic voices, surrounded by fragments. Again, it's hard to describe in any accurate or meaningful way the way I felt while stuck in this limbo for the third time. I mean, I wasn't actually feeling, but I guess think is a better way of putting it, what I thought while stuck in limbo, surrounded by memories, by thoughts. Like both times before, they simply buzzed wildly about, screaming at me. They never faded. Like before, I try to listen to what they said, try to wonder, I guess you could say. God, why is this so confusing? As to why they sounded so panicked, so painful, so... they're trapped, so mournful. They can't rest. As expected, the process, the cycle, occurred the same as before. Light, evolution, and ultimately, another fragment. Another rebirth. This would become another first for me as well. This time it was the day of my high school prom when it happened. When I saw them again standing in the corners of the lunchroom. I remembered that in the past, by which I obviously mean the past 2 lives, I had asked Nancy Jean to the dance. I also remember how I'd also turned down Edith Rain's offer to take her to the dance. She had a crush on me since 7th grade, while I was, of course, making googly eyes, usually striking out, with Nancy Jean at the time. Anyway, I say this to say that this was the first time I realized something about these things. These figures, these fragments, these shadows following me. This time, when those feelings of deja vu I keep mentioning hit me, I thought back to those moments in limbo. I thought of how all of those screams were moments of my life, moments that had been repeated. It was then that I had an idea. What would happen if things were different? What if I didn't ask Nancy Jean to the dance, instead going with Edith? What would happen then? Would they finally go away? The chapter ends, a new one begins. So that's just what I did. When Edith Raines asked me with those painfully shy eyes that, admittedly, I always found kind of cute, I said yes. Sure enough, one of them disappeared. That night, things were different as well. Before, I ended that night by leaving the dance with Nancy Jean, driving up to the hilltop just a few miles away, where we'd kiss and fall asleep in the car. This time, though, Edith, being not quite as adventurous or unruly, asked if we could just grab a burger and a milkshake instead from the diner afterwards. It felt different. Not necessarily in a good or bad way, but just that, different. I still had fun with it, even if I wasn't the whole Hallmark classic, making out under the beautiful starry night sky with the girl of my dreams in me like before. But at the same time, it didn't feel entirely right either, if that makes any sense. I wasn't happy. Sure, I wasn't sad, but I wasn't happy. Not actually happy. I guess what I'm trying to say was that it didn't feel natural, you know? Like I was forced. I didn't hate Edith Raines, but I didn't want to dance with her. I had fun grabbing food with her, sure, but it's not what I was actually supposed to do. What I actually wanted to do. I wanted to be with Nancy Jean. I wanted to dance with my childhood crush, lay under the stars with her again. But I didn't. I didn't because I'd already done that before. I didn't because... across the gateway. Because I wasn't supposed to. Because this wasn't that life anymore. Because this wasn't my life anymore. This was different. This was new. I wasn't living my own life here anymore. I was being pushed through a constant cycle, constantly starting over, constantly haunted by memories from times now lost. I essentially wasn't me anymore. I was a shell. I was a ghost. A shadow, a lingering consciousness, a fragment. I existed, and still exist now, only as a forgotten soul, a whispering memory crammed in the furthest recesses of my mind, helplessly trying to live a life that ended long ago inside one that I shouldn't be a part of. I wasn't meant to still exist, not with my consciousness, not with the memories I had before. That's why I see them, the shadows, who themselves hold my lost memories. They must act as some sort of counter, some sort of security to whatever force is continuing this cycle to ensure that events can't repeat by resetting itself, even if it appears to hurt them as well. I am, in this life, 22 years old again. In 2 days, I'll be receiving my bachelor's degree in engineering, where I'll then be attending a university for my master's. That's right, I never dropped out of high school, never got the job at the factory, never started smoking, and never met Jasmine. Instead, I graduated, went to community college, even scored second in my class. I'm accomplished now, yet it feels wrong. It feels so much more like I'm just forcing everything to be different, forcing everything to change so the shadows don't come back, so the memories won't come back. I can't live my life anymore because my life ended. Death wasn't the end. Now, I'm just a shadow, trapped forever in a life I shouldn't be in, a fragment of a former life, lost forever to time. Death was only a gateway, and I crossed it.
There's a house like it in every town. You know the kind. The house that the children speak of in hushed tones, daring each other to clamber the fence and ring the doorbell, but none ever do. Their parents shush them and tell them not to spread rumors, but they walk a little quicker when passing it, glancing out of the corner of their eye and trying not to shudder as they remember the stories from their youth. Maybe the house is old and dilapidated, worn down by the passage of time and a lack of care and maintenance. Or it could be new and sparkling, and people avoid it anyway, knowing who chooses to make it their residence. But maybe no one lives there at all, and it's avoided because its reputation is forever stained by the black deeds that took place there. Maybe what happened in the house matters, even all those years ago, and that's what people whisper about. In Billy Gibson's town, he didn't need to go far to see the house. He lived on the same street as it. The street had been part of the wealthier area on the outskirts of town, way back when the house had been built. Then, it had been magnificent to behold, a multi-storied beacon of real architecture and early-century craftsmanship, until the incident, after which it had fallen into disrepair. The property itself was 3 times the size of those surrounding it, the house itself built at the top of a small hill, the only high point in an area flattened out. Over time, the area had changed, and most of the other houses as old had been torn down. The large sections were cut up and subdivided as what had been the affluent outer edge of town became just another suburb. The house now stood alone on its little hill, a beacon of faded grandeur and days gone by, looming over a sea of bland, cookie-cutter, single-level, medium-density housing. Some said that the presence of the house is what caused the area's decline, which was hard to argue with. Decades later, the suburb was only just beginning to recover, the relatively affordable housing bringing in new people. Now, Billy didn't know any of that history. He was 12 years old and in the process of moving to town. Billy's dad had been transferred for work, so they'd packed up their lives into boxes and moved halfway across the country so his dad could advance his career. The great opportunity, his mother had called it, snapping at him for complaining that he was going to have to leave his school and his friends behind. "It might not seem like it right now, but this is what's best for all of us, William," she'd said. Billy had stopped arguing then. Mom using his real name was a sign he was about to be grounded if he continued to talk back. Now, he was sitting sullenly in the back seat of the family car, which was following the moving truck. "Not far now, bud," his dad said. "This is our street." Billy didn't reply, choosing instead to glower at the back of his dad's headrest. Not only had his parents uprooted his life, they'd chosen the worst possible time to do so. It was the beginning of summer. He'd be starting his vacation knowing nobody, instead of spending months playing outside with his friends. His mom started up again about how great the move was going to be, and wasn't he looking forward to starting at his new school in the fall, and blah, blah, blah. Billy thought to himself, turning his head to look out the window, and what was that? He sat up straighter in his seat, still ignoring his mother's chatter as he peered out the window at the black shape on the hill ahead. He saw the impressively high fence, spiky black iron sprouting from a thick stone base, and a rusty chain and padlock holding the tall, arched gates shut. A faded, slightly askew sign declared, "Private property, keep out." His eyes followed the long path that snaked its way through the overgrown lawn, up the hill to the steps that led up to the porch and the massive front door. He breathed in deeply as the car drew closer, taking in the view of the house in its entirety. 3 stories tall, with the 3rd-story windows peeking out from the steep, shingled roof, a Queen Anne Victorian, his parents would have called it. The whole house was painted in somber colors, and the wooden shingles of the roof were so dark they seemed almost black. Billy noticed that the paint was flaking off in places. In fact, the whole place seemed in disrepair. The windows were filthy, and the front porch sagged. "Cool," Billy whispered to himself, looking at the corner room of the top story. He immediately considered it a tower, as it seemed to sprout out independently of the rest of the house with its own domed roof section. It almost looked like a turret on the battlements of a castle. To him, the house seemed almost taller than it was wide. It loomed over everything else in the neighborhood. The windows were all covered, either by curtains or hanging sheets on the inside, or by the overgrown ivy that twisted its way up one side of the house, encroaching on the part of the roof. Scanning the house with his eyes, the only room he could see where the windows weren't covered was the tower. He blinked and did a double take, looking again to the window, turning in his seat to do so as the car drew level and then passed the property. "Billy," his mother exclaimed as he undid his seatbelt to kneel on the seat and peer out the window with his nose pressed against the glass. "Will you sit down?" his mom said, turning to look over her shoulder at him. "Right now! William, put your belt back on!" Billy slowly slid back into his seat and buckled up. He'd have sworn there'd been someone looking out from the tower, but they weren't there when he'd turned back. Not long after, Billy's dad slowed the car and they turned into the drive of their new house, which looked exactly the same as the ones on either side of it, Billy noted. They got out of the car as the moving truck arrived and came to a stop as well. "Did you see that house, Dad?" Billy asked as his mother went to unlock the front door so the movers could begin. "The big dark one on the hill back there?" his dad answered. "I only got a glance at it, was keeping my eyes on the road. Maybe we can check it out when all this stuff is inside," he said, ruffling Billy's hair as he opened the car trunk. Later, Billy sat in his new bedroom surrounded by boxes. His bed was up against one wall, his desk and dresser against the other, the only things in the room that the movers had unpacked. He'd made a nuisance of himself while they were unloading the truck, getting underfoot until his mom snapped at him to get out of everyone's way and start unpacking his room. He looked around and scowled. Struck by an idea, Billy got up off his bed, made his way around the boxes littering the room, and headed down the hall towards the front door. This room was smaller than his old one. He didn't much like the idea of unboxing all of his things. Packing them up had been bad enough. "I'm going for a walk," he yelled, hoping to make it out of the house before someone stopped him and gave him some unpacking to do. "Don't be too long, bud," his dad called after him, poking his head out of the bedroom he was currently unpacking. "We'll get pizza for dinner. I'll order soon." "I'm just going to look at that house from earlier," Billy yelled again, closing the front door behind him. He headed out to the street, where he turned and started back the way they'd driven in earlier. Within a minute, he could see the house, sitting higher than everything around it on its own little hill that rose up from the street. It made him think of a gargoyle he'd seen in a church once, a dark shape squatting above and looking out over the town. The closer he got, it loomed bigger and bigger until he finally stood in its shadow. Billy stopped at the arched front gate and stood looking through the tall iron bars. "Cool," he whispered to himself. It reminded him of something you'd see in a movie. He reached out to touch the padlock that was holding the chained gates shut. It was the biggest lock he'd ever seen, bigger than his fist, and it felt impressively heavy. He wondered who had the key. "I wouldn't if I were you," a voice rang out from beside him. Billy turned to see an old man shuffling a shopping bag towards him. Billy thought of anyone older than his parents as old, but this man looked to be at least 70. "Not thinking about trying to get in, were you?" he inquired, stopping next to Billy, who shook his head vigorously in reply. "You're not from around here?" he asked. The old man's eyes narrowed slightly as he looked at Billy. "No," Billy stammered. He thought about it briefly. "Why?" he asked. The old man chuckled to himself, a wry smile on his face. "'Cause the kids in this neighborhood know to stay away from this place, that's why," he said, looking briefly up at the house before looking back to Billy. "Name's Frank. I live over there," he said, gesturing across the road before offering his hand. "I'm Billy," Billy replied, shaking Frank's hand, firmly, like his dad had taught him to do. "I just moved in up the street. We were driving in today, and I saw this place." He trailed off. "Well, she's an eye-catcher, I'll give you that," said Frank. "That or an eyesore, depending on who you ask." "Who lives there?" Billy asked. "No one anymore," answered Frank. "Place was built way back around the end of the Great War. The owner was some fancy doctor type, worked up at the college medical school. Him and his pretty young wife and their little girl. The town was sort of sleepy back then. Doc and his wife were minor celebrities around here, having money and style and getting this big old house built for him." "What happened?" asked Billy. "Well, there were rumors about the doc and some of the company he used to keep, some unsavory types at the university, followers of Crowley's teachings, not the sort a respectable doctor should be associating with." Billy nodded, although he had no idea who this Crowley was or why he would have followers. "Anyhow, the girl disappeared one day. There was a big search, but she was never found. Everyone suspected the parents, of course, but there was never anything proven. Mother went a bit mad, with grief, they reckoned. She used to sit in the window of that room up there, calling for her little girl." Frank pointed to the tower room. "She vanished as well after a few months, also never to be seen again. Doc himself took a header out of the same window one day, not too long after that. Some people reckon he'd killed his child and then his wife, and the guilt drove him to do it, but I don't know. Reckon there's more to it than that." Billy raised his eyebrows questioningly. Frank reached up to scratch at one of his ears, looking around conspiratorially. See, my grandfather was on the force back when it all happened, he said, leaning closer and lowering his voice slightly. Now, he didn't work the case himself, but he was buddies with some of the officers that did. They said that the good doctor's clothes were all torn up, like something been worrying at him. Plus, he landed on his back, facing the house, like he'd fallen while trying to climb down instead of jumping out. And they also said... He trailed off. Said what? Encouraged Billy, even though he could feel the hairs on his arms prickling. He tried to focus on Frank and not look up at the house. Well, they said that the look on his face was like nothing they'd ever seen before. Complete and utter terror is what my old pop said they described it as. So, what happened? Asked Billy, almost in a whisper. Frank shrugged. No one really knows for sure. Police ruled it a suicide since there was nothing to show anyone else had been in the house with him when he went out the window. They searched the place, of course, but nothing turned up. There was never any sign of the wife or the daughter. The place sat empty for 20 years, and then a relative moved in, a cousin, if I remember right. They would restore the place to its former glory, or something like that. Frank chuckled again. They disappeared too. Lasted a week and made some arrangements with workmen to come to look at the place, but when the workers turned up, they were gone. House has been shut up near 60 years now since I was in high school. Doc didn't leave a will, and the title's been tied up in some messy family trust, so that's why it was never sold or bowled down. Again, Billy nodded like he knew what a title or a family trust was. Anyway, people around here gossip and talk, and they reckon there's something not quite right about the place. You see their houses? Frank pointed at the two flanking properties on either side. Billy nodded again. Well, no one lasts long there. I've been in my place a long time now, long enough to see the area go bad the first time. More and more new people have been moving in the last 10 years or so, and the street seems to finally be recovering. But those two houses, I don't think I've ever seen anyone last longer than a year and a half. Heard chatter about shadows and things going bump in the night. He chuckled. Now, I don't put as much stock in the stories as some do, but I can't deny the place sometimes gives even me the jubilees. Frank looked up at the house, and Billy did the same. They both just stood there for a bit. Billy broke the silence. Does anyone ever go in? Frank shook his head. Oh, there were stories back when I was young. People going in and never coming out. Just stories spread to keep the kids afraid and stop them from exploring. One thing that did happen for sure, though. A while back, some kids went over the fence and were messing around in there. One tried to climb the trestle that ivy's growing on. He pointed. Anyway, a piece broke off in his hand since it ain't been looked after for the better part of a century. The kid fell 2 stories. Didn't die like the good doctor did when he took his tumble, but he broke his back, ended up in a chair. Frank looked Billy in the eye. He never made it in the house. Kids around here have been wise enough to stay out since then. Billy was smart enough to take this for the warning that it was. Yes, sir, he nodded. Good, said Frank. I put the chain and lock on the gate after that. After the kid fell, cops got involved. A lawyer looking after the trust came to see the place, and we talked. Anyway, his firm pays me a couple of $100 a year, and I keep an eye on the place for him. I've got the keys. It gives me the creeps, but I give it a once-over a couple of times a year and let the lawyers know how it's holding up. Place is starting to fall apart. I reckon it'll all come down on itself before they ever sort out who owns the damn thing properly. Frank fell silent, and they both looked up at the house again. Oh, wow! Billy heard his dad's voice and turned to see him coming up the street. His dad stopped next to him and looked up at the house. I see why you wanted to come look at this, bud. "And you're making friends already," he said with a wry smile, offering his hand to Frank. "Mark Gibson, Billy's dad. We've just moved in a couple of blocks down. Nice to meet you, Mr. Frank shook his hand. "Malloy, Francis Malloy. Just call me Frank, everyone does. I live over the street. Noticed Billy here looking up at the house." He gestured towards it, as if there could be any other house he could have been talking about. "Was just giving him a bit of a history of the area." Frank and his dad exchanged pleasantries and talked for a few minutes as Billy looked up at the house, holding the iron bars of the fence and peering in between them as he did so. As he did, it seemed that one of the curtains twitched slightly. He stared hard at it, not blinking, waiting to see if it'd do it again. "Anyway, we'd better be getting back," Billy's dad said, jerking Billy out of his reverie. "I ordered pizza before I came to find Billy, and it's probably arrived by now." He and Frank shook hands again. "Nice to meet you, Frank," he said. "We'll see you around the neighborhood." "And you," Frank replied. He and Billy shook hands again as well. "Good to meet you too, Billy." He pointed down the street. "There's a park around that corner, 2 blocks up, where the kids play ball if you're looking for something to do other than looking at spooky old houses." He chuckled, giving Billy a wink. The streetlights flickered on as they walked back. Billy hadn't realized how late it was getting. He looked over his shoulder once, seeing the dark shape of the house looming above its surroundings. A small chill came across him, and he turned back, focusing on the footpath ahead of him and talking to his dad. Later, as he sat with his parents eating pizza amid a mass of half-unpacked boxes and jumbled furniture, his thoughts kept returning to the house, particularly the upstairs tower room. Deep in thought, he took another bite of pizza when his dad's voice broke his contemplation. "Frank seems like quite a character," he said, chuckling a little to himself. "Frank?" his mom asked. This older guy Billy met out on his walk earlier. Seemed like the type to spin a good yarn." His mom pursed her lips. "I'm not sure William should be spending his time with old men." "I liked him," Billy piped up. "Oh, lighten up, dear," his dad said. "I'm sure Frank's harmless, and besides, he told us where the local ballpark is. Billy'll meet plenty of kids his own age soon." Billy didn't sleep well that first night. He dreamt of standing on the sidewalk with his father again, looking up at the house. He could see something moving around in the tower room, but every time it seemed like it would come to the window, it'd turn away and keep pacing. He looked to where his father had been, only to find him gone, Billy left alone on the footpath. Dad? Billy stuttered, turning around to look for him, but seeing only an empty footpath. It had gone very dark all of a sudden. He turned back, and the house seemed a lot closer, suddenly looming over him menacingly. He heard a tapping, like fingernails against glass, and looked up at the tower, where there was a silhouette against the window. "Billy!" He woke with a start, blinking the sleep from his eyes as the image of something shadowy peering from behind a curtain faded from his mind. "Breakfast!" his mother called again. Billy groaned and dragged himself out of bed. After breakfast, Billy quickly tired of unpacking his room. He sat on his bed reading a comic book before an idea came to mind. He put the comic down, digging through the half-empty boxes littering his room until he found the one with his cap and his ball glove in it. He grabbed both and headed for the door, shouting down the hall as he went, "Back later! I'm gonna find that ballpark Frank told me about!" His mom started to yell something about not going out until he'd finished unpacking, but Billy pretended he hadn't heard her, quickly shutting the front door and running down the street until he was out of earshot. Once again, he could see a dark shape sitting slightly above the roofs of the other houses as he went up the street. As Billy approached the house, Frank was sitting across the street on his porch. He waved, and Billy waved back using the hand holding his glove. Frank pointed towards one of the side streets further down. "That way!" he called out. "Thanks, Frank!" Billy yelled back, heading towards the street. He looked up at the house as he passed, slowing his walk slightly as he did. He saw the window of the tower room and shivered slightly, imagining the doctor falling backward out of it, screaming all the way down before hitting the pavers below with a sickening thump. Billy tore his eyes away and picked up the pace again. He didn't look back, but he was sure he could feel Frank watching him as he went. Billy made some new friends that day, playing ball. He ran around in the bright sunlight, enjoying the heat. It was warmer here than where he'd moved from. At one point, a ball flew past him into the outfield. He jogged after it, stooping to pick it up once it had stopped rolling, and he too stopped dead, a chill settling over him as he looked up. He could see the house from here through a gap in the trees that bordered the field. It was a couple blocks away, but he could still see the sharp angles of the roof jutting up, a dark, spiky shape that stood starkly against the blue of the sky. He stood unmoving for a moment, just staring up at the house. "Billy!" one of the other kids yelled. Billy shook his head, turning to throw the ball back. He glanced at the house again and then turned away, the sun's warmth chasing away the chill as he looked back at the game. "Sorry," he laughed, running back to his spot in the field. "Zoned out there for a second." The game finished around lunchtime as all the kids headed to their respective homes to eat, promising there'd be another game tomorrow Billy could take part in. Billy headed home, waving again to Frank as he went and trying his best not to look up at the house as he passed. His best wasn't good enough, and Billy stole a glance or two along the way. That was how things went for the rest of the summer. Billy and his parents settled in, the place his family had moved into becoming comfortable and familiar, home instead of just a house. He'd play ball in the park most days, sometimes stopping to talk to Frank on his way home. Eventually, summer left. The weeks turned into months and then to years. Billy started and then finished middle school and moved up to high school. He lost some friends, made new ones, played baseball and football, and discovered a burgeoning interest in girls. He grew to appreciate his dad's taste in music, and they'd talk about old bands like Led Zeppelin and Pink Floyd, listening to them on drives around town. Billy got older, and as he did, some things changed and some stayed the same. But one thing in particular never changed. As Billy got older, the house was never far from his thoughts. Even though it had been years and he knew nothing more than what Frank had told him on that first day, his fascination with the house never waned. He couldn't quite put his finger on something about it, some unnatural urge. It didn't fade, it grew. Slowly, but it grew all the same until it was like an ever-present itch, forever irritating but never able to be completely scratched away. He went to the library and looked through the newspaper records, finding some about how the doctor's family had gone missing and how the doctor himself had died, but nothing more recent than that. He regularly talked to Frank, mostly about baseball. It turned out Frank had played semi-professionally in his youth, and although Billy genuinely enjoyed the old man's company, on some level, he was aware that he'd head to Frank's more often than he would have if he didn't live across the road from the house. He was pretty sure Frank knew that too, although he'd never say anything about it. One day, Billy asked Frank who would look after the house when he died. "No need to worry about that, boy," he chuckled. "Plenty of life left in me yet." A couple of times, he asked Frank if he could go in with him when Frank did his 6 monthly checks on the place for the estate lawyers, but Frank wouldn't let him. Something about liability if he got hurt putting his foot through a rotten board or something. Billy got the feeling there was more to it than that, something Frank wasn't being entirely truthful about, but he never pressed the issue. His friends, who'd grown up in the town, told stories about kids breaking in and then going missing, but it was always a friend of a friend's cousin or something like that. No one was ever on the same page about who or when, and Billy figured it was all just urban legends. However, everyone knew about the boy who'd ended up a cripple trying to get in one day. It seemed that was a common warning that all the parents told their kids to keep them away from the place. Billy tried to turn his mind to other things: school, sports, movies, music, and girls. But the house never fully faded from his conscious or unconscious thoughts. He'd take the long way heading places to pass the house on his way, deliberately at first, and then almost unconsciously. Sometimes he'd snap out of a daze and find himself standing at those arched gates, not really sure how he'd gotten there. His parents began to notice changes in his personality. He was often short with them, belligerently clashing with their attempts to engage with him. In particular, Billy's relationship with his mother began to sour as he rebelled against her attempts to instill discipline into her son, and his father was often left having to act as the peacemaker. His parents didn't know that his sleep was often disturbed by dreams of looking up at a dark house, seeing something moving around inside, but never quite being able to work out what it was. Instead, they put his being increasingly moody and sullen down to teenage hormones. One evening, Billy found himself standing across the dining room table from his mother, both of them shouting over the other to be heard. His dad had asked something about school over dinner, and Billy hadn't responded straight away. "Billy?" his dad asked again. "What?" he replied, blinking a few times and realizing his dad had asked how his report for English class was coming along. "Oh, I'm still working on it." "Working really hard, I'm sure," his mom scoffed, taking a large sip from her wine glass. His dad frowned slightly at her. "I'm happy to take a look at it if you need a hand," he said. "It's a boring assignment, Dad." "Billy, we've talked about this," his dad said gently. "Your grades have been slipping lately. Maybe it's time you took a break from sports for a while to focus on school." "But Dad, I batted 300 last season." "And a fat lot of good that's going to do when you flunk out," his mom interjected, taking another swig of wine. "You need grades to get into and stay in college, William, even if you're marginally above average at sports. You've got no work ethic. You think that's the kind of student a college will be looking for?" "Don't you roll your eyes at me, you disrespectful little shit!" His mother's voice rose shrilly as she stood and slammed both of her hands on the table, making Billy and his father jump in surprise. Things deteriorated from there, Billy rising to his feet as well and beginning to yell himself. They went back and forth for a while, with his father sitting with a shell-shocked look on his face. The argument reached a crescendo when his mother accused him shrilly of being a selfish brat who didn't want to be part of the family. "Well, maybe if you weren't such a bitch all the time, then I'd want to be," Billy yelled back, turning to storm out and heading for the front door as he ignored his mother's shouted reply. "Let him go, dear. You both need some space right now," Billy heard his father saying as he slammed the door and stalked furiously down the road with his hands in his pockets, muttering to himself as he went. As he walked, Billy began to feel slightly bad. He hadn't meant to end up screaming at his mom. He was just so tired and frustrated all the time. He should go home and apologize and make up with his parents and... No! The anger intruded into his thoughts again. Why should he be the one to say sorry? He'd done nothing wrong. Besides, she'd started the fight. He scowled and looked up from the pavement for the first time since he'd stormed out, immediately realizing where he was. Billy shook his head in frustration as he saw the silhouette of the dark house ahead of him against the clear night sky. It seemed like he was always ending up here, sometimes as if awakening from a dream. "I'll go around the block to get home," he thought, lying to himself that it was to give his mom some more time to cool down and not some unnatural desire to be near the house that made him choose not to just turn around. When the tall black iron of the fence came into his peripheral vision as he came alongside it on the footpath, Billy fought and lost against the urge to look up at the house. It was dark out, but it was a clear night, and there was enough light from the streetlights and the rising moon that he could still make out some details. His memory filled in the rest. His eyes were drawn to where the doctor had fallen from the high tower room. It seemed like this was always the first thing he looked at. He continued to walk as he looked up at the house, casting his gaze around and... "Hang on," he thought, stopping dead in front of the high, arched gates. He'd walked past this house 1,000 times or more, spent hours standing outside looking up at it, and it had featured in more than a few of his dreams. Billy knew the fence line and the outside of the house like he knew the back of his hand, and even in the dim light of the evening, he immediately saw that something was different. He took a step backward, cocking his head slightly to one side as he tried to figure out what it was. The heavy chain and padlock still hung around the tall black iron of the gates, but there was something off about the lock itself. The shackle part of the massive lock seemed longer by maybe 1/4 of an inch. Frank must have done a check on the place in the last couple of days and not closed the padlock all the way. It was beginning to rust. Maybe that had stopped it from shutting completely. Billy reached out to touch the lock, pulling it down. There was a little resistance, but then the shackle popped completely out of the body of the padlock. The gate was unlocked. Billy's heart began to race. Was he really going to do this? He looked on either side of him, up and down the street, and saw nobody. He quickly checked over his shoulder and saw Frank's house had its curtains drawn. Perhaps, if he'd been in a more rational mood, he wouldn't have gone through the gate. But his blood was still up, and he was feeling particularly rebellious from the fight with his mother earlier. He quickly looked to either side and then unhooked the padlock completely. Being careful not to let the chain clank against the iron, Billy pushed one gate open just enough to squeeze through, wincing slightly as the hinges squeaked a little. After he'd slipped through the gap, he reached through the bars and re-chained the gate, hanging the padlock again but being careful not to completely lock it. After all, he'd need to get back out again. Keeping low so as not to be seen, Billy made his way up the overgrown walk that snaked up the hill to the front door, although he didn't climb the stairs onto the porch. Frank might have made a mistake with the padlock, but there was no way he would have left the front door unlocked. Instead, Billy made his way round to the side of the house that was overgrown with ivy. He looked at the thick, twisting vines that had long since crushed and overgrown the trellis against the house, and how they stretched to the roof. As luck would have it, the vine grew alongside a window on each of the house's 3 stories. A thought crossed his mind, and Billy checked the ground floor window. The height of the house's foundations meant that the base of the window was at roughly eye level, but Billy figured he could pull himself up if he could get the window open, although he threw that plan out almost immediately. A curtain was pulled so he couldn't see into the room, but Billy could see that the window was locked anyway. A thick bolt connected the window directly with the frame. Not getting that open, he thought. Then he looked up at the windows of the upper stories. But you might not have locks on a window you couldn't reach from the ground. He moved to the base of the ivy plant. As he stood in the shadows, he remembered the stories about the last boy who tried to climb up here and fallen, shuddering a little at the thought of lying on the hard ground and being unable to move his legs. The ivy will have grown since then. It'll be stronger than it was, Billy reasoned, seeing that some of the main stalks of the plant were as thick around as his wrist or more. He figured that the kid who'd fallen had done so trying his luck with the old, rotting wooden lattice that was now being held up by the ivy instead of being the anchor it had once grown on. Billy grabbed at the plant, got one foot up, and lifted himself off the ground, pausing to make sure the entire creeper didn't just come away from the side of the house. When it didn't, he began to climb. Slowly, carefully, Billy made his way up the creeping ivy. He cautiously tested each hand and foothold before he put his full weight onto them. Some swayed a little under his weight, but on the whole, the vine was fairly solid. He made it to the level of the next window and shuffled to the side of the ivy to get closer. He tried not to look down. He was more than high enough to be worried about the fall. Billy looked inside and saw that although there wasn't a bolt as there was on the downstairs windows, a smaller catch still stopped the window from sliding up. He gripped the frame and tried to push the window up anyway. It was heavy, but moved slightly. The wood the catch was screwed into seemed to be rotting. As he pushed, he saw the catch moving a little and let the pressure off the window before reapplying it, which made the catch wiggle even more. He did this a couple more times, continuing until it pulled itself free entirely with a crack that seemed deafeningly loud in the still night. One rusted screw breaking off completely and another pulling up splinters as the rotted frame gave way. He froze in place, pulling himself closer to the wall by the ivy and looking around. The house next door was empty, no need to worry there, but the porch light of the house across the road flicked on. Frank's house. Oh shit, he whispered to himself, turning his attention back to the window. If Frank saw him up here, there'd be no way he'd talk himself out of it. With some effort, Billy managed to slide the window up and all the way open before hurriedly pushing the curtains aside, clambering inside, and turning to shut the curtains and the window again. He sat on the floor, breathing heavily from the exertion, but listening hard for the sounds of Frank's yells from across the street. Nothing. Billy figured he'd gotten away with it unseen. With a sigh of relief, he turned his attention to his surroundings, which seemed to be some kind of sitting room. As his eyes adjusted, he saw that all the furniture in the room was covered in sheets. Although long curtains covered all of the other windows in the room, they were threadbare with age. The light coming through them was dim, but enough for him to see without a flashlight. Billy moved to the door and opened it slowly. He moved into the hall and winced as a floorboard creaked loudly underfoot. He instinctively felt like he should still be as quiet as possible, even though he had the house to himself. The hallway was also dark, but seemed lighter down the passageway, so he headed in that direction, peeking into rooms here and there as he did. They were all much the same, curtains shut, but the light seeping through enough to see that most of them had sheet-covered furniture in them. Billy turned a corner and came to the first-floor landing. He looked at the staircases in front of him, trying to decide whether to go up to the top floor or down to the ground, deciding to head down to begin. The staircase creaked loudly as Billy descended. It was U-shaped, turning a corner in the middle and continuing down, ending near the house's entrance. Billy found himself standing in a large foyer with a massive front door in front of him. It seemed like the dining room was off to his left, and the right appeared to be some kind of lounge. Even in disrepair and with what little dim light was coming through the threadbare curtains, this room inspired a sense of wealth and taste, which Billy figured was what the people who'd built it had been aiming for. He imagined this place when it had been new. In his mind, he could see guests arriving for some kind of party, being greeted by the butler and escorted into the lounge for drinks and introductions. He headed that way and was momentarily awestruck. This was a room where the social elite of the day had gathered. The far wall was dominated by a massive fireplace, surrounded by an ornately carved mantelpiece. Like the other rooms, the furniture was covered in dust sheets, but Billy could see in his mind's eye what it must have looked like in its heyday. The walls were wood-paneled from floor to ceiling, and Billy imagined they'd looked magnificent when polished and gleaming. The covered couches by the walls would have been neatly arranged around that low table. Those armchairs would have been near the fire, and there would have been a table or a cart for drinks over towards that wall. He moved further into the room and spied something on the wall above the fireplace. A massive painting in a fancy-looking frame. He could make out 3 figures in it, 2 taller and 1 small one standing between them in front, but that was all the detail he could see in the darkness. He stopped in the middle of the room and stood there, straining his eyes to try to make out the detail in the painting as a sense of unease came over him. He guessed that the painting was of the original occupants of the house, the doctor and his family. But something was wrong with it. Not taking his eyes off the painting, Billy moved towards one of the windows and cracked the curtain ever so slightly. The hair on the back of his neck stood on end as the moonlight streamed in, and he could clearly see for the first time what was wrong with the painting. He stood to the left, his wife beside him and their daughter in front with a hand from each of her parents on her shoulders. He'd been right about who the painting was of. This could only have been the doctor's family. What would have been an impressive family portrait now looked off, with the paint yellowing and beginning to flake with age. Billy felt he would have gotten the creeps from the painting even if it had just looked old, but the other damage made it much worse. The canvas had great rents, as if something had clawed at it. The father's face had been completely obliterated, and there were large slashes through the mother's figure as well. The daughter was the only figure that was untouched, although some of the paint in her dark hair had flaked away, leaving a white space that looked like her skull had been exposed. Billy shuddered and let the curtain drop, and the room fell back into relative darkness. He'd been feeling pretty full of himself until now, but now he felt ill. Who'd cut up the painting, and why? Maybe this hadn't been such a good idea after all. Billy scanned the room as his eyes readjusted to the dark and turned to head back towards the foyer, but stopped. He turned again to face the fireplace. What was that? Something was definitely off about it. It seemed askew? He moved closer, and his eye was drawn to the wall on the right of the fireplace. He looked to the base of the wall where it met the floor and saw it protruding slightly. Billy reached out and touched the seam where the panel met the side of the mantelpiece, and his eyes widened as he realized there was a lip there where the panel wasn't aligned properly. He felt around, getting his fingers around the lip. He paused a second. He could feel a slight breeze on his fingertips. Billy pulled, and the wall panel creaked loudly as it swung open on hinges hidden from the room by careful construction. Billy looked at the space he'd opened. The panel had covered a gap behind the wall that appeared to have been bricked up at some point, but part of that brick had fallen or been pulled away, leaving a gap large enough for him to have fit through. Shivers ran up Billy's spine as he looked at the jagged edges of the opening that the missing bricks and mortar had left. He was struck with the image of teeth in the mouth of some hungry creature lying in wait to gobble up anything foolish enough to stray into its lair. Billy could see a staircase leading down under the house, although what little light there was failed after 5 or 6 stairs. He could see loose bricks on a couple of the steps, but they didn't litter the stairway randomly as if they lay where they'd fallen. It was as if they'd been pushed to either side after they'd come down, so the staircase could be used. He peered through the opening in the bricks. An overwhelming sense of something being wrong down there came over Billy. He was 100% sure that the answer to whatever it was that he'd come into the house hoping to find out was down those stairs, but as he looked into the darkness below, his resolve fled. The stupidity of what he'd done hit him all of a sudden. He He'd ignored all of Frank's warnings about this place being dangerous, and he'd broken into a dark house in the middle of the night. Time to go, he thought. Billy stepped back to grab the edge of the hinged panel. As he did, he paused, noticing some lettering inside the panel. He squinted and was able to make out a few words. "Do what thou wilt," Billy read. There was more, but it was illegible thanks to age and decay. He shuddered. This place was seriously giving him the creeps now. He pushed the panel mostly closed again, back to the ever so slightly ajar position he'd found it in. With a bit of luck, he could get out of here and back into bed without being caught, and then he could forget all about this place. He turned to move away and then stopped as he heard something. Funny how these old places creaked, almost as if the house itself was alive, Billy thought, trying to reassure himself. Just the house shifting a little in the wind. Thump. Billy gasped and looked at the wall. The sound had come from behind the panel he'd shut. He stood there, barely breathing and listening hard. For a little bit, there was nothing. But then he heard a dragging, scraping sound, followed by another muffled thump, and then another scrape, and it continued. Thump, scrape, thump, scrape, thump, scrape. Shivers ran up Billy's spine. He wasn't alone in here. Shit, he breathed to himself. Looking frantically around in the large sitting room he was in, he spied one of the large blanket-covered couches sitting slightly out from its spot near the wall. He quickly approached it and then stood there for a moment, frozen with panicked indecision, until he realized the sounds of movement were getting closer. Whatever was making that noise was making its way up the staircase behind the panel. He quickly flattened himself against the wall, sliding down behind the couch just as the fireplace panel began creaking open again. Billy clamped both of his hands over his mouth to stop himself from breathing too loudly and screwed his eyes tightly shut. He heard the panel creak some more as it slowly swung completely open, and heard shuffling and scraping as something squeezed through the gap in the brick and into the room. Whatever it was must surely be able to hear his heart jackhammering in his chest, Billy thought, trying to stay quiet. He lay there as he heard the thing moving around again, that same heavy thump followed by a scraping, sliding noise. It sounded like someone walking but dragging a foot behind them. He slowly opened one eye, but the blanket that covered the couch reached all the way to the floor, so he couldn't see what had come up from the hole behind the wall. The sounds of movement got a little fainter. He heard it move towards the main entrance, and then the thumps slowed a little. It was heading upstairs. Billy stayed frozen behind the couch until he couldn't hear movement anymore, and then very slowly got up and out from his hiding spot, breathing a deep sigh of relief. He quickly moved to the closest window, slipping in between the curtains. He was on the opposite side of the house from where he'd come in, but he didn't care. He just wanted out. Billy spied the lock on this window, slid the bolt open, and lifted it. And it didn't budge. Billy's heart sank as he saw something he hadn't been able to see from the outside. 2 nails were driven directly into the frame, holding the window shut. He figured that Frank must have done it at some point to keep people out. Billy came out from behind the curtain and moved carefully to the next window. Peeking behind that curtain, he sighed as he saw the nails also driven into that window. Frank would have done them all. Careful to stay quiet, Billy made his way towards the massive front door, peering around the corner to the entranceway before he did to make sure whatever had moved upstairs wasn't looking over the landing towards him. When he saw that the coast was clear, he moved to the door and dared to hope for a second as he saw that the large, old-style iron bolt hadn't been closed, but then realized that there was no way that bolt could have been closed from the outside. So, of course, Frank would have left it open when he left. He tried the handle, and the door was locked. Without Frank's key, there was no way Billy was getting out this way. Perhaps if he smashed a window? No, too risky. The thing would definitely hear that. Plus, even if it didn't hear him, he'd almost certainly cut himself getting out, or get caught, because the odds were that somebody would hear and raise the alarm. Billy may have been scared as hell, but he was still a high schooler who didn't want to be grounded until he went off to college. Billy gulped as he turned and looked at the staircase. It looked like the only way out was back the way he'd come. Billy slowly made his way up the staircase. The first stair had creaked alarmingly when he'd stood on it, and he'd winced and frozen in place, listening hard for movement. When there was nothing, he started moving again, carefully stepping at the very edge of each stair where it met the wall to stop the creaking. He stopped just before he reached the first-floor landing, leaning forward to look up and around the corner. He couldn't see anything in the dark, so he went onto the landing and turned to the right, heading down the hallway towards the room he'd come in through. He was right about to turn the corner in the hallway when he froze, again listening hard. Something was moving ahead. He crouched, pressing his back close to the wall. Billy slowly leaned his head to peek around the corner. It was dark in the passage ahead, but there was definitely something down there. He could hear it shuffling around and see a vague outline. It was person-shaped, but its movements were off, sort of jerky. It was definitely dragging a foot behind itself when it moved, and, oh crap, it was coming towards him. Billy pulled his head back around the corner, coming to his feet and backing away. He could hear it getting closer, and it did definitely see him in the hall. There was nothing to hide behind. Making a split-second decision, Billy turned and rapidly returned to the landing, moving past the staircase he'd come up and heading to the one that would take him to the top floor. He scrambled his way up it on all fours, sticking near the wall and trying to be as quiet as possible. He glanced back as he made his way around the U-bend in the staircase, catching a momentary glimpse of a dark shape moving jerkily onto the landing from the hallway before it disappeared from view as he headed higher up the stairs. Billy turned to the left as he came to the landing on the top floor, moving down the hall to the first doorway he saw and opening it. This room seemed a lot brighter than the rest of the house, he thought absently as he hurriedly closed the door behind him, trying not to make any noise as he did. He braced his back against it and closed his eyes, again listening hard as he tried to slow his breathing. His heart sank as he heard shuffling on the staircase. The thing was making its way upstairs. Billy screwed his eyes tighter shut and wished with every fiber of his being that the thing wouldn't try to get in. The noise stopped as the thing reached the top of the staircase, and then the thumping and scraping started up again as it began to move. Closer, Billy realized, to his dismay. He held his breath as he heard it come closer and closer and closer still, and, oh God, it was right outside the doorway. And then it was past him and getting further away. It had passed his door and continued on down the hallway. Billy very slowly let his breath out and opened his eyes. He immediately saw why this room was brighter than the rest of the house. Unlike the other rooms with their floor-length curtains, these windows were bare and the moonlight was streaming in, creating bright patches in stark contrast to the dark shadows where the light wasn't touching. he was in the tower room. Billy took a step, looking across the dust sheet-covered furniture over towards the rounded section. He was a little surprised at the size. He thought the room was bigger than it seemed from outside the house. If he moved to any of those windows, he'd be able to see the street, and I wonder which one the doctor took a header from. The thought intruded. Billy shook his head and went to turn back to the door. He jumped as he heard a voice. "It was this one." He bit back a yell and frantically looked around the room as the voice spoke again. "You shouldn't be in here." The words were clear, although they had an odd quality. It sounded like they'd come from miles away. He cast his gaze around, hunting for who'd spoken. He squinted as he peered at a shadowy spot on the floor next to one of the street-facing windows, stepping towards it as he did. The moonlight coming through the window was bright enough that it was difficult to see into the gloomy parts of the room, but he could make out a figure. His sense of unease grew as his eyes adjusted, and he realized that the figure was a little girl, maybe 9 or 10 years old. She was very pale and wearing a dress that Billy would have called old-fashioned. The hair on the back of his neck started to prickle. "Mummy doesn't like when people come in the house." Again, the words were clear, but Billy felt as if he'd had to listen hard to make them out, like he was listening to an old recording. "What?" Billy stammered, taking half a step towards her. Was that your mother I heard moving around?" She leaned forward, her upper half coming out from the shadows and into the light, and Billy was immediately struck with the sense that something was very wrong, although it took him a second to figure out why. She didn't cast a shadow at all. The moonlight was shining straight through her. She seemed indistinct in the light, illuminated but almost shimmering around the edges. He took a step back in horror as he clearly saw her face in the light for the first time. It was the girl from the ruined painting downstairs. Goosebumps erupted all over Billy's skin, and he began to tremble. He was on the verge of turning to sprint from the room as she made full eye contact with him, speaking once more. "Get out while you can," she said, closing her eyes after speaking. She leaned back into the shadows, disappearing from sight. Billy didn't need to be told twice. Trying to control his now frantic breathing, he backed up to the door, not taking his eyes off the shadowy spot the girl was in. He scrambled behind his back at the handle, eventually gripping and opening it. He then moved swiftly into the hallway, pulling the door behind him again with enough presence of mind not to slam it. He stepped towards the staircase and, suddenly, was aware of a presence behind him, gasping as something grabbed him from behind and covered his mouth with a rough hand. Billy grabbed at the hand and tried to wrestle himself free as another gripped him by the shoulder and spun him around, coming face to face with a frightened-looking old man. It was Frank. He looked into Billy's eyes for a second, making a "keep it down" gesture with his free hand as he slowly removed the other from Billy's mouth. "Frank, what are you doing in here?" Frank held a finger up to his lips, wincing at the noise Billy had made as he shushed him. "Quiet, boy," he whispered. "I've got a key, remember? Now what in the hell are you doing in here?" Billy paused, certain he was in some deep shit here, although Frank seemed more worried than anything else. He started, and trailed off into silence, unsure how to explain. "Frank, there's a little girl." Frank's eyes widened at that. And there's something else in here, too. I heard them looking around for me. How did you know I was here?" he asked. "Saw you go in through the window," Frank replied in a low voice. "I'd no chance of making it up that ivy, so I had to dig the keys out. Took me ages to find the damn things. Memory ain't as sharp as it used to be. Billy, we need to get out of here, and right now. But you've been in here lots of times, Billy said. Never at night, boy, and with good reason, Frank snarled, looking around himself as he did. He was scared, Billy realized, and with that realization, his own already high level of fear went up significantly. Listen, we need to get out of here, right? Frank trailed off. They'd both heard a noise from down the hall, away from the staircase. Frank grabbed Billy by the shoulders, again looking him directly in the eyes. Run, he whispered breathlessly. Go out the front. I bolted it to stop anyone following me in, but it's not locked. What? Billy stammered. Now! Frank snarled, cutting Billy off. They both took a sharp breath as they heard another soft thump from down the hall, turning towards it but seeing nothing in the darkness. Then a scraping sound, followed by another thump and another scrape, quicker than the ones Billy had heard earlier, as if whatever was making its way towards them was speeding up in the darkness of the hallway. Frank spun Billy around and shoved him between the shoulder blades, propelling him down the hall in the direction he'd come from, away from the sound. Run, boy! Run, and don't look back! Billy ran. Frank turned back towards the noise and began shouting something into the gloom. Billy turned and hit the staircase at a dead sprint, taking the stairs 3 at a time and almost falling as he went. When he hit the first-floor landing, he again heard Frank yelling something, but he couldn't make out all the words. The blood was rushing in Billy's ears, and he was whimpering as he went. The one bit he caught sounded like, "Have to go through me, you bitch!" He started on the next staircase and then froze, grabbing the handrail to stop himself. He could hear Frank's cries, which had gone from swearing and threats to unintelligible shrieking. Suddenly, they cut off entirely, replaced by the sounds of something splattering and then a gurgling that slowly faded away entirely. Billy's lip quivered as he tried to hold in a cry of his own, and he tore his leaden feet away from the step he'd stopped on, resuming his flight. He reached the bottom of the last stair and stumbled. Billy hit the ground hard, sprawling and skidding on his face, momentarily dazed. He rolled over, trying to shake the sense back into himself, and sat, looking back up at the staircase. He could hear something moving again, thumping its way down the stairs. Oh shit, oh shit, oh shit, oh shit! The words poured out of Billy's mouth in a panicked whisper as he scrambled backward on his butt, trying to shake the cobwebs from his fall out of his mind. He managed to get his feet under him and stood, almost tripping again in his haste as he stumbled towards the entryway to the front door and safety. Reaching the massive door, half again as wide as the one on his own house, he grabbed the handle and turned it, tugging frantically. It didn't budge. Remembering Frank's words, he looked at the door again. The old-style bolt he'd seen earlier was shut. It moved stiffly as he tried to open it. Frank must have struggled to close this, he thought, noting in the back of his mind that he couldn't hear thumping on the stairs anymore. He worked the handle part of the bolt up and down, trying to get it to loosen as he pulled it open. After a brief struggle, it finally gave way and slid out. He grabbed the handle again, pulling hard as the door started to open. Man, it was heavy, and the light from the moon and the street streamed in through the gap as the door swung in from the frame. Bang! A hand reached from over his shoulder, slamming into the door and effortlessly shutting it again. Billy stared at the hand, frozen once more in place. It was dark red, but that was because it was covered in blood. Frank's blood, he thought, almost absently to himself, as he looked, too terrified to turn and look behind him. The bits of the hand and wrist that he could see between the viscera that covered it were pale and gray. Dead skin, he thought to himself as pins and needles ran up his spine. The hair at the back of his neck prickled at the slight feeling of hot, wet breath on it. The hand was almost delicately built, the nails long but ragged and caked in fresh gore. Shifting his gaze ever so slightly, he could see the long, thin arm disappearing back over his shoulder. It was standing right behind him. Looking towards the door, a tear rolled down his cheek as he turned the handle again, slowly, ever so slowly, until it gave a soft click, ready to open. He tried to open the door, but the hand stayed in place, firmly holding the door shut. He saw the arm from behind his left shoulder flex slightly, keeping the door in place without any effort. Billy wasn't weak, but he wasn't strong enough. The hand didn't move. Billy saw thick blood covering the fingers, running slowly over the back of the wrist and down towards the forearm. A couple of streams flowing down to the side and dripping off, hitting the floorboards with a soft splat. The breathing behind him stopped momentarily, and he heard a low growl rumble from a wet throat. Billy let go of the door handle, his arms falling to his sides. The hand drew back, retreating over his shoulder. Billy kept staring straight ahead, unable to tear his eyes away from the bloody print the hand had left on the door. The growling stopped, and he felt the breath again. Lip trembling as he fought to hold back tears, Billy screwed up his face and shut his eyes tight. The whisper of breath he'd felt on the back of his neck had also stopped. Barely daring to hope and keeping his eyes firmly shut, he slowly turned on the spot until he was facing back into the house. He stood there for a moment, listening hard. He couldn't hear anything. He took a deep breath, and then another, steeling himself. Billy opened his eyes. He began to scream.
Chilling tales for dark nights.